Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing fine. And yes, this is the next part of Ben with Gwen. A story about how Ben and Gwen's relationship evolves over the next 4 years following their summer trip. So let's start without any delay. Let's start this great series. November, year -1. Gwen sat in the back seat as her parents drove to Ben's house. It was Thanksgiving Day, and she was thinking hard about what was going to happen when she saw Ben this time. It had been about 6 months since they'd started fighting. Since then, their parents had begun bringing them to visit each other less and less, as they would just end up fighting every time. Today was the first time in almost 2 months that she and Ben were going to see each other. Gwen wondered if that was enough time for their feud to have died down. When they arrived at Ben's house, his parents greeted them at the door and let them inside. Gwen followed behind the adults as they walked through the house to the dining room, chatting as they went. Gwen wasn't paying attention to them, though. She was looking around each room they passed through, hoping to find Ben since he hadn't come out to meet them. In the dining room, Gwen's parents took their seats while Ben's parents finished the final preparations of their Thanksgiving dinner. Her grandfather was also supposed to arrive shortly, so they planned to wait for him to get there before they started dinner. Gwen didn't join her parents at the table. Instead, she stood off to the side until it became clear that the adults were too absorbed in their conversation to notice her slip out of the room. She found Ben in the living room, sitting on the couch watching TV. He was staring blankly at the screen, almost like he was lost in thought and not really paying attention to what was showing. He didn't notice Gwen enter the room either, so she stood in the entryway and didn't say anything to announce her presence. She just nervously toyed with the hem of her shirt, watching Ben and waiting for him to notice her. Eventually, Gwen worked up the courage to make a sound. She said to get his attention. Ben flinched and glanced in her direction. He looked surprised at first, but then he narrowed his eyes at her. Gwen spoke up again. "Hey," she simply said, giving Ben a slightly nervous smile. "What are you doing here, dweeb?" Ben asked in annoyance. "Shut up," Gwen said reflexively. She immediately regretted doing so, but she couldn't stop herself from glaring back at him. "Ah, great," Ben complained. "With Grandpa coming, I thought this Thanksgiving was gonna be fun. But now it's ruined." Gwen knew it was counterproductive, but she felt herself getting angry. "What the heck is your problem?" "You are." "I'm just trying to talk to you." "Then don't. We're supposed to be friends." "We're cousins, not friends." Gwen froze, shaking in anger. "Fine, whatever. I don't wanna be friends with a jerk like you anyway." Not able to take it anymore, she stormed out of the room. The rest of the night didn't go much better. Ben and Gwen were both excited to see their grandfather, and ended up pushing and shoving each other trying to get to him first. At dinner, they sat across from each other and stared at their food as they ate, only looking up to glare at or insult each other. For the most part, the adults left them to their own devices, only stepping in to tell them to cut it out when they got too loud or said something too mean. Because of Ben and Gwen's fighting, Gwen's parents thought it best to leave shortly after dinner was concluded. Ben's parents walked them to the front door along with Maximum. As everyone said their goodbyes, Gwen gave her grandfather a hug. She began to feel a little panicked when she realized she was leaving without coming anywhere close to making up with Ben as she'd hoped she would that night. As she hugged Max, she looked around for Ben, intending to at least say goodbye to him and maybe even apologize. But she didn't see him standing with his parents. Her heart sank as she followed her parents out the door. She heard the door close behind her, and her head drooped miserably. That was it. That was my last chance, and I blew it. She knew she'd see Ben again. In just a few weeks, they'd meet on their birthday, which they generally shared a celebration for. But from Gwen's point of view, if she couldn't even stop fighting with him when she wanted to stop fighting with him, then there was no way their fighting would ever stop. She'd wanted to end it that night, but if anything, she'd only made it worse. Why can't we just get along? February, Year 4. This isn't working. Gwen found herself pacing in her room one night. It had been over a month since she'd started avoiding Ben as much as she could bring herself to. She'd begun with the hope that, by not seeing him, she'd stop thinking about him. But, as Gwen had come to realize, her plan didn't work. If anything, she only thought about him more. Throughout the month, she'd been pretty miserable just about all the time. Thinking back to how she'd felt during all the previous extended periods of time she'd spent separated from Ben, she couldn't believe how stupid she'd been for not seeing this coming. If there's anything I've learned from all those other times, it's that even if he can be an annoying, idiotic, arrogant jerk, I still can't live without him. And now that she'd admitted to herself that she was actually in love with that annoying, idiotic, arrogant jerk, being separated from him felt much, much worse. There had been just a few times recently when she had hung out with Ben. No matter how good she was at making excuses, she couldn't avoid him all the time, especially with Lucy being so insistent. Those days were by far the happiest days she'd had in the last month. Seeing him was a brief reprieve from her misery, and saying goodbye to him at the end of the day was one of the hardest things she'd ever had to do. So, after all that self-imposed misery, she finally decided that enough was enough. She needed to see Ben again, as often as possible. However, she still had her original problem. I'm still in love with him, and I need to stop. If avoiding him didn't work, she'd just have to think of something else. But she couldn't. She needed help. So, she thought long and hard about who she could trust enough to ask for help with something like this. The first person who popped into her mind was Ben. She laughed bitterly at the irony of it. The one person I could trust more than anyone else is the last person I could ever tell about this. So she had to think of someone else. Her parents would probably freak out and tell Ben's parents, and then they'd all decide that she and Ben needed to be separated for their own good. Gwen dreaded the thought. I'm not letting him go. Not again. Her parents weren't an option, so she considered her grandfather next. He was one of the kindest and most understanding people she knew, but could he go so far as to be understanding of something like this? Gwen had her doubts. Max loved her and he loved Ben too, but there had to be limits to what he'd tolerate. Gwen couldn't ruin his image of them. Then, another thought occurred to her. Lucy. Of course. It's always been Lucy. Gwen smacked her forehead and even smiled a bit at the obviousness of it. Lucy was constantly joking around about how cute of a couple she and Ben would make. Gwen didn't think she meant any of it, at least she didn't at first, but even if it was all just for fun, at least she seemed like she wouldn't be freaked out by the idea. When she finally lied down to go to bed, Gwen actually felt a little relieved. Tomorrow, she'd finally be able to tell someone about this. Even if it wouldn't solve her problem right away, at least she could get it off of her chest. The next day, Lucy was walking home with Gwen after school, as she often did. So Ben's busy today, she said, stating the obvious, but just trying to make conversation. Millimeter Gwen nodded. He isn't usually busy on Fridays, so that's kinda disappointing. Millimeter. Lucy looked at Gwen. She was staring into space as she walked forward. Lucy wouldn't be surprised if the other girl hadn't heard a word she'd just said. I wonder what's on her mind. Lucy smiled deviously. He's probably off somewhere having sex with Julie. What? Ah, so you are paying attention. Lucy giggled. Gwen recovered from her shock and looked unamused. Very funny, she said sarcastically. Lucy giggled once more. So, what do you wanna do today? She asked. Wanna come over to my house? Gwen's distant stare returned for a moment. Can we go to my house instead? She asked. It's a bit closer, and I have something important I want to talk to you about. The way Gwen had said that made Lucy concerned. Is everything okay? Gwen looked around, like she was afraid someone might overhear them. I'll tell you when we get there, okay? Okay. Lucy nodded. As they walked to Gwen's house, it occurred to Lucy that there was a very obvious explanation for Gwen's behavior. Feeling optimistic, she started to get excited as she imagined what Gwen wanted to talk to her about. She's gonna admit it. Gwen seemed really serious, so Lucy tried to hide her excitement in case she might be put off by it. They walked together mostly in silence, but on the inside, Lucy was screaming with excitement. When they got to Gwen's house, Gwen led Lucy up to her room and shut the door. Lucy walked across the room and sat down on the edge of Gwen's bed. So, what did you want to talk about? She asked, getting right to the point. Gwen stood stiffly in the middle of the room across from her. She fidgeted with her hands and stared at the floor, but she didn't say anything. Gwen? Lucy asked. Gwen looked up and met Lucy's gaze. Look, you have to promise me you won't tell anyone about this, okay? Wait, was I actually right? Of course. I promise, Lucy said, keeping a straight face. Okay. Gwen took a few deep breaths, but again seemed to be having trouble spitting it out. When Gwen continued to hesitate, Lucy spoke up. You know you can tell me anything, right? Anything at all, Gwen. I promise. Gwen nodded. Okay. Okay. Now, I know this is gonna sound really weird, and I don't know how else to say it, so I'm just gonna say it. She locked eyes with Lucy and took one last deep breath. I think I like Ben. She did it. It only took Lucy a second to process what Gwen had said before she smiled brightly. Yes. She hopped to her feet and threw her hands up in celebration. Yes. 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 I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. She jumped up and down, cheering and laughing while Gwen continued to stand stiffly in the center of the room. Oh my glob, this is so awesome. I always knew. Lucy froze when she looked at Gwen again. She did not look happy. Her eyes were cast downward and she was shaking where she stood. Oh no. Oh. Oh gosh. Gwen, I'm so sorry. I thought you'd. She stepped in front of Gwen, looking at her apologetically. No, it's okay, I just. Gwen shut her eyes tightly, but she opened them again after Lucy put her hands on her shoulders. Hey, Lucy said, looking at her very seriously. You don't have to play the tough girl with me, okay? Looking into Lucy's eyes, Gwen started to tear up. She collapsed forward, wrapping her arms around the other girl and pressing her face into her shoulder. Lucy caught her and gently lowered the both of them down to their knees on the ground. Shush, shush, it's okay. Lucy whispered in Gwen's ear, comfortingly stroking her hair as she did. She'd never seen Gwen cry like this before. Gwen tried to talk, but Lucy couldn't make out her words through her sobbing. Everything's gonna be fine. I promise, Lucy told her. It's so messed up, I'm so messed up. What am I gonna do? He's gonna hate me. Gwen managed to choke out a string of her worries. Shush, no, Lucy said gently. There's nothing wrong with you. Nobody's gonna hate you. Especially not Ben. It went on like that for a few minutes. Eventually, Gwen stopped crying. She continued to lay in Lucy's arms for a moment before leaning away from her and sitting upright. Sorry about that, and thank you, she said quietly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Don't mention it, Lucy said. I'll always be here for you. Gwen nodded appreciatively. So what should I do? She asked, her face making it clear that she was desperate for answers. What do you want to do? Lucy asked. I want to stop, Gwen said, as if it should have been obvious. I want to stop liking him. Why? Why? Gwen repeated, narrowing her eyes. What do you mean, why? I mean, why don't you want to like him? Are you kidding me? Gwen stood up angrily. What kind of question is that? It's messed up, that's why. Why? Lucy asked again, standing up as well. Because he's my cousin. So it's incest. And there it is. Lucy stared at her for a moment, trying to think of the best way to approach this. Gwen, are you religious? Gwen furrowed her brow. She seemed confused, as if she thought that question seemed completely out of the blue. What? She asked. Well, no, not particularly. Then why do you care? Lucy. It's not just a religious thing. Everyone says it's wrong. Everyone said Camille and Joel getting married was wrong, Lucy pointed out. No, don't you do that, Gwen said firmly. This is completely different and you know it. How so? Because there's actual reasons to say this is wrong. Like what? Like it leads to birth defects. Gwen visibly cringed a little as she said that. So? Lucy said. That doesn't make it wrong, it just makes it risky to have kids. Besides, who said anything about having kids? Loving someone doesn't automatically lead to that. You're 14, were you planning on having kids anytime soon? Well, no. But. Gwen looked extremely worried, but she had nothing else to say about it. You know, Darwin married his cousin, Lucy pointed out. Yeah, I know. Gwen sighed. But things were different back then. Marrying your cousins was okay. So what changed? Lucy asked. How did it suddenly go from okay to wrong? It doesn't matter. Gwen insisted. Look, even if it was okay, Ben's not just my cousin. He's practically my brother. What's the difference? There's a big difference. What is it? It's. Gwen stuttered, trailing off. She suddenly started pacing back and forth. How could you even be okay with this? It's crazy. This isn't good. I need to calm her down. Lucy stepped up to Gwen and put a hand on her shoulder, stopping her from pacing. Gwen, look, she said. You and Ben are perfect for each other. It's so easy to see that. No matter how much you guys fight, you always end up coming back to each other in the end. You love each other. That's not love, Gwen argued. That's just family love. Lucy's expression changed almost imperceptibly as she tried to hide her immediate reaction to that statement. Families don't always come back together after a fight. Gwen's eyes went wide. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. It's okay, Lucy assured her. I don't matter right now. A silence followed. Gwen walked over to her bed and sat down on the end of it, hanging her head sadly. Lucy followed after a moment, sitting down next to her. So? Lucy asked. What do you want to do about Ben? I don't know, she admitted, starting to tear up. I just don't know. Lucy put her arm around her, guiding her into resting her head on her shoulder. She held her like that and comforted her as she began to cry softly. Lucy figured Gwen wouldn't want to be left alone after that, so she offered to sleep over for the night. She also knew Gwen would have a hard time hiding how down she was from her parents, so she did most of the talking when they asked them if it was all right for her to stay over. She also got Gwen's parents to let them order pizza for dinner so they wouldn't have to sit down and eat with them. Most of the night was spent holed up in Gwen's room where they could be alone. By the end of the night, Gwen was doing a little better. It was clear that the situation with Ben was still on her mind, but she wasn't crying anymore, and she managed to have some fun hanging out with Lucy. The whole night, Lucy had remained comforting and optimistic, doing her best to stay positive and keep Gwen's spirits up. But when she went to bed later that night, the guilt hit her. Did I make a mistake? She had tried for so long to get Ben and Gwen to realize their feelings for each other. To her, it was obvious how they felt about one another, and they were so perfect for each other. She thought it would be a happy occasion when she finally got Gwen to admit how she felt about Ben, and all that would be left would be to get Ben to admit how he felt about her in return, and then they'd live happily ever after. But that wasn't what was happening. Gwen was absolutely devastated, and Lucy felt responsible. Maybe I pushed her too hard. Lucy was scared. Not only had she already hurt Gwen, but she realized things could get even worse. If Gwen hadn't reacted the way she'd hoped, maybe Ben wouldn't either. What if Gwen is right? Gwen seemed to think Ben would be disgusted with her if he found out how she felt about him. Lucy told herself that could never be the case. No matter how much they fought, Lucy knew they loved each other deep down, so Ben could never truly hate her. But she'd been wrong already. Maybe, in trying to get the two of them together, she'd actually end up destroying their relationship forever. The thought terrified her. She could handle failing to get them together, but hurting them like that was something she could never forgive herself for. Now, for the first time ever, she was having doubts about her plan. Maybe I really should help Gwen get over him. Maybe I should just let Ben stay in denial. Maybe it really would be best if everything just went back to the way it was before. These thoughts bombarded her mind for hours as she tried to get to sleep. In the end, she came to one conclusion: everything from now on would be up to Gwen. She wasn't going to tell Gwen what to do, she wasn't going to use any tricks or secret plans to try to get them together, and she wasn't going to meddle any more than Gwen wanted her to. This isn't about me. This is about them. Gwen woke up way too early that morning. Looking out her window, she could see that it was still dark outside. She rolled over in her bed and tried to get back to sleep, but she couldn't. Getting to sleep in the first place had been difficult enough with her and Lucy's earlier conversation still fresh in her mind. Now that she was awake again, she was back to having it stuck in her head. The whole thing was way too confusing and scary. She wasn't used to having absolutely no clue how to handle a problem. Without knowing why, Gwen got out of bed and left her room, making her way down the hall to the guest room. Lucy had stayed there back when she was living with her, and that's where she was sleeping now. Quietly, Gwen opened Lucy's door, stepped inside, and shut the door behind her. Lucy's sleeping form was illuminated by the moonlight. Gwen stood by the door, staring at her. She still didn't know what she was doing there, but she wanted to be near Lucy. Talking to her today had been more helpful than it had seemed at first. Lucy didn't have any easy answers that could solve her problem immediately, but just having someone she could trust and talk to about this was certainly something. Talking with her today was the first time she hadn't felt completely alone in almost 2 months. Silently, Gwen crept across the room and came around to the other side of the bed. Pulling up the covers, she lied down next to Lucy. She won't mind. And I'll probably wake up before she does anyway. Again, Gwen had no idea why she felt the need to sleep next to Lucy, but now that she was lying so close to her, she felt safe. Lying on her side facing the other girl, she whispered to her, even though she knew she wouldn't hear her. "Thank you." Before long, Gwen drifted back to sleep, her worries temporarily forgotten. When day broke, Lucy opened her eyes. She was still tired, so she didn't move, but she felt something on her arm. Slowly, she turned her head to look. To her surprise, Gwen was lying next to her, clutching her arm as she slept. It took Lucy a moment to process the situation. When she realized how close her face was to Gwen's, she blushed a little. "I really want to kiss her right now." She turned her head away from Gwen and mentally scolded herself. The last thing she wanted to do right now was make things even more complicated for Gwen. Instead, she told herself to relax and just enjoy the moment. She found it was very relaxing to have Gwen so close to her. She looked so beautiful lying there with the morning light streaming in over her. Before too long, Gwen opened her eyes as well. "Morning, sleepyhead," Lucy said. Gwen didn't respond for a moment. Then, as if just realizing where she was, her eyes opened wide in panic. "Oh God," she said, sitting up. Sorry, I trying to get out of bed." She stumbled and got caught on the blankets, falling to the floor. Lucy laughed as she got out of bed. Gwen stood up and continued with her apology. "I'm sorry. I don't know why, but I just wanted to, I don't know." "Gwen, it's fine. Really," Lucy said, walking around the bed to put her hands on Gwen's shoulders. "The whole point of me spending the night here was so you wouldn't have to be alone. I would have gladly shared a bed with you if I'd known you wanted to." Lucy's gentle smile seemed to soothe her, but Gwen was clearly still embarrassed. She simply nodded her acceptance. "Here, sit down." Lucy led Gwen to the end of the bed and sat down with her. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Gwen stared blankly in front of her. "Better," she said, unconvincingly. "I mean, a little. Did you come into my room last night because you were still worrying?" Lucy asked. "Sure." Gwen shushed her, glancing nervously at the door. Her parents were home now, so she was very afraid of them overhearing anything about this. "Sorry," Lucy said, lowering her voice. "But were you?" Gwen nodded. Yeah, I guess I was still a little freaked out." "It's okay. I get it. Lucy reached over and rubbed Gwen's back. We're gonna figure this thing out, okay? It's gonna be fine. I promise. Gwen nodded again, turning to give Lucy a weak smile. Okay. Now, how about some breakfast? Lucy suggested. The two of them went downstairs, but Gwen still looked troubled. They ended up having to eat with Gwen's parents, and Gwen became distant and untalkative in their presence. Luckily, Lucy was able to talk enough for the both of them, and she kept Gwen's parents too distracted to notice she was feeling down. After breakfast, they went back upstairs to shower, and Gwen let Lucy go first. While she was in the shower, Lucy tried to think of what to do about Gwen. She had to do something to cheer her up, or at least get her to talk about her problem some more. She's just confused. She'll feel a lot better once she knows what she wants to do. After her shower, she went back to the guest room to get dressed, and she kept thinking about the situation while she waited for Gwen to finish her shower. Before long, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," Lucy said. The door opened and Gwen stood in the entryway. She was dressed, but her hair was still wet from the shower. Lucy knew that Gwen's short hair was fairly easy to dry, so she guessed that Gwen had wanted to see her as soon as possible. Stepping inside, Gwen quietly shut the door. She looked at Lucy, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she walked to the other side of the room, turned, and walked right back. She looked like she was continuously on the verge of saying something, but just couldn't quite do it. Lucy let Gwen pace up and down the room once, then decided she should speak first. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked, knowing she didn't need to specify. "Yes," Gwen said. Lucy stood up and patted the bed, signaling for Gwen to have a seat. Gwen obliged, then Lucy walked over to the desk and grabbed the chair, pulling it over to the bed and sitting down across from her. "Okay. What's on your mind?" Lucy asked. Gwen fidgeted nervously, avoiding eye contact. I've been avoiding Ben a lot lately," she admitted. Lucy nodded. "I figured you'd been." Gwen looked apologetic. "I didn't know what else to do. I thought that if I avoided him, I could just get over him. But it didn't work." "Duh. That never works. How long have you felt this way about him?" Lucy asked. Gwen looked off to the side and narrowed her eyes, thinking about it. I realized it after the dance," she said. "But, I think, maybe, I don't know. I think it might have started earlier than that, even." She looked back at Lucy, who was giving her her full attention. "I've always had some kind of, strong feelings for him. I just always thought it was because we were cousins, or best friends, or superhero partners, or whatever. But, I guess maybe that changed at some point. It's kind of hard to tell when, exactly." Lucy nodded. "I get it. It's not always easy to tell when these things start. Yesterday, when I told you I liked him, you said you knew," Gwen said. "When did you figure it out?" "The day I met you guys," Lucy said. Gwen looked confused. "What?" "At Camille and Joel's wedding," Lucy explained. "You looked so jealous when I was the one who got to dance with Ben, and I knew it couldn't have been just because I got to be the flower girl." Gwen looked super embarrassed. "Maybe," she said, as if she herself wasn't sure if she'd actually cared about being flower girl after all. "Wait. So, all this time, all those jokes you've made about me and Ben, about us making a cute couple, or, that kind of stuff, you were serious? You weren't just messing with me?" Lucy giggled. Well, of course I was messing with you. But that doesn't mean I wasn't also serious. Gwen looked like she was having a hard time processing this. I knew this wasn't something that'd be easy for you to talk about. So, I thought, maybe if I joke around about it, maybe that'll make it a little easier for you. Lucy's expression became apologetic. But I guess it didn't really work. So, I'm sorry. No, it's not your fault, Gwen assured her. It was stupid of me not to realize what you were doing from the start. And, well, it did sort of work. I mean, part of why I thought it would be okay to ask for your help with this was because you make those kinds of jokes. Really? Lucy asked. Yes, Gwen said. You've already helped me a lot. Lucy smiled, which made Gwen smile a little too. Well, I'm glad, then. But, what do you want to do from here? Gwen's smile faded. I don't know. Do you want to keep avoiding him? No. Gwen's expression was panicked for a second, then she looked nervously at the door, probably hoping her parents hadn't heard her shout. Sorry, it's just, I hate it. I've been separated from him before, and for much longer than this, too. And, I can't stand it. Then maybe you should go see him, Lucy suggested. I don't think he's busy today. Ask him if he wants to go to a movie or something. I want to, but... Gwen looked at Lucy pleadingly. Could you come with me? She asked. I don't know if I can handle being alone with him right now. Of course, Lucy agreed, nodding her head. Whatever you need. Thanks. There was a brief pause. Lucy thought this was good progress, and considered just letting it be for now. But she needed to know what Gwen's ultimate goal was. If I know more, I can help more. So, does this mean you've given up on trying to get over him? Lucy asked. Would you date him if you got the chance? Gwen looked calm on the surface, but Lucy could tell she was struggling to come up with an answer as she took very deep breaths. I don't know, she said. That's okay, Lucy said. No need to decide that right away. We've got all the time in the world. We can take it one step at a time. Gwen nodded her understanding. We don't even have to see Ben today if you don't want to, Lucy continued. We can put that off till tomorrow, or later. You and me can hang out again today, just the two of us. Gwen sat silently for a moment. No, she said. She had a determined look on her face all of a sudden. I'm done hiding from him. God, she's hot. Lucy smiled. There's my Gwen, she said, glad to see the other girl was finally getting a handle on the situation. Gwen headed back to her room, and Lucy followed her. She grabbed her phone off of the desk and called Ben. Lucy waited silently behind her, ready to listen in on the conversation. After a few rings, Ben picked up. Gwen. He sounded a little surprised. Hey, doofus, she said. Come over to my house. It wasn't a request or a suggestion. She'd said it more like a command. So hot. Screw you. Come over to my house was Ben's immediate reply, totally unfussed by Gwen's seemingly rude invitation. Screw you. Lucy's already here. All right, fine, whatever. I can be over in a bit. Bring money. We're probably going out later. K. Later, dweeb. Later. Gwen hung up. She turned around to find Lucy staring at her, smiling. Maybe I was a little harsh. No. Lucy said. That was perfect. Really? Yeah. That whole exchange was, like, you guys in a nutshell. I love it. Well, whatever. Gwen grabbed a towel out of her closet and started drying her hair with it. Lucy watched her for a second. Want me to go set up your Wii U? Lucy asked. Sure, Gwen agreed. It's in the basement. We can use the TV in the living room today. All right. Lucy smiled to herself as she stepped out of the room. I'm gonna make sure you have fun today. I promise. Gwen played video games with Lucy while they waited for Ben to show up. She did her best not to be nervous, but she couldn't take her mind off of the situation. She hadn't made any plans about what to do when he arrived. She'd made that phone call to invite him over without really thinking. It's like something Ben would have done. As much as Gwen tried to hide how nervous she was, Lucy would still catch her staring off into space every now and then, deep in thought. Whenever she did, she'd put a hand on Gwen's shoulder and say something comforting. Gwen smiled. Seeing Lucy act this serious was weird to her, but she was glad to have her by her side. That was one thing that would be different this time. The last few times she'd hung out with Ben, Lucy had been there too, but she hadn't known how Gwen was feeling. Now she did, so she could be with her every step of the way. When the doorbell rang, Gwen froze. Do you want me to get it? Lucy offered. No, Gwen said. I got it. She stood up and headed for the front door. When she got there, she put her hand on the doorknob, took a deep breath, and opened it. Thump. She felt it as soon as she saw him, but she shook it off. It's about time you showed up, she said. Yeah, Ben said, nonchalantly giving her a light punch on the shoulder as he stepped inside. Ben's here. Lucy's cheery voice came from the other room. Before Ben had a chance to respond, she ran into the room and jumped on him. Gwen watched while Lucy smiled and giggled as she hugged Ben. Despite how serious and comforting Lucy had been this morning and the day before, she was acting like her normal, cheery self now that Ben was there. Gwen was reminded just how good of an actor Lucy was. It was weird to think she would never truly know how Lucy was feeling unless Lucy wanted her to. I guess that's just part of being a shapeshifter. Once Ben freed himself from Lucy's hug, he looked into the living room and saw the TV on and controllers on the couch. So, what game am I kicking your asses in today? He asked. Gwen scoffed. Dream on. Ben grabbed a controller and sat down on the far end of the couch. As Gwen and Lucy followed after him, Lucy grabbed Gwen's arm, giving her a serious look. She gestured to the two open spots on the couch, then tilted her head questioningly. It took her a moment, but Gwen managed to decipher the looks Lucy was giving her. She was asking if Gwen would rather sit next to Ben or sit on the other end of the couch with Lucy in between them as a buffer. Gwen nodded her understanding, then put on a brave face and walked forward to sit down right next to Ben. Lucy sat down on the other side of her, smiling and giving her an encouraging pat on the shoulder. Gwen and Lucy restarted their game and added Ben as a third player. For the next hour, they continued to play without any major incidents. Every now and then, Gwen would remember that this was the first time she'd purposely spent time with Ben in a long time. Being with him felt so natural that she kept forgetting how little she'd seen him recently. It was as if nothing had changed. However, one thing had changed. Whenever she and Ben would accidentally bump into each other while moving around on the couch, Gwen would get embarrassed. Before, she might get annoyed and playfully shove him, or sometimes they could end up leaning against each other while they played without even realizing it. Gwen really wished they could do that now, but she was afraid to even touch him. She suspected Lucy somehow knew exactly when she was thinking. Every time she pulled away after accidental contact with Ben, Lucy would find some excuse to touch her. A pat on the back, a playful shove, a celebratory hug. It was strangely comforting. Soon enough, their last game came to a conclusion. No, 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 no. Gwen shouted. And finish. Ben stood, holding his arms up in a victory pose. No fair. Gwen complained. I was ahead the whole race. I would have won if you hadn't thrown that goddamn blue shell. Actually, that was mine, Lucy said, raising her hand and giving Gwen a teasing smile. Don't be mad just 'cause I'm better than you, Ben said, joining in on Lucy's teasing. You guys are the worst, Gwen said, waving her hand exasperatedly and putting her controller down. All right, let's do something else, Ben said, putting his controller down as well. This game, destroys friendships anyway. Food. Lucy said, jumping to her feet. Oh yeah. Didn't you say we were going out today? Ben asked. Yeah, we can go get lunch, Gwen said, taking out her phone and checking the time. What are you in the mood for? Pizza. Ben suggested. Gwen shook her head. Just had some last night. Burger Shack was his next suggestion. Sounds good, Gwen agreed. Gwen and Lucy went upstairs to grab their coats before they left. Upstairs, Lucy leaned in close to Gwen. How are you holding up? She asked quietly. Gwen looked around nervously, then spoke softly. I'm fine. You sure? Yeah, I'm sure. This has been fun so far. Much better than not seeing him at all. Lucy smiled. Great. Gwen nodded, smiling as well. Together, they went back downstairs. I can handle this. June, year 0. Home. Well, if I move this here, and this here. Gwen muttered to herself. What are you working on, sweetheart? Frank asked, looking over his daughter's shoulder as she worked on her laptop. Planning out the rest of my summer, Gwen said. On her laptop screen was a large, color-coded calendar labeled Vacation Schedule. She'd already filled in most of it weeks ago, but with less than 2 weeks before school let out, she still had a few gaps left to squeeze activities into. Frank laughed. That's my girl. Always so organized, just like her mother. Gwen smiled proudly, then put her hand to her chin, thinking. What else can I do this summer? A thought occurred to her. Hey Dad, can I visit Grandpa sometime this summer? Your grandpa? Well, I don't think that'll be very easy, Frank answered. What? Why? Gwen turned around in her chair to face her father. Because he'll be on the road all summer, traveling the country and going camping with your cousin. Gwen felt her heart sink. Oh. Okay, she said, trying not to sound too disappointed as she turned back to her computer. Well, good night, sweetheart. Don't stay up too late, Frank said, leaving the room. Okay, Dad. She heard the door shut behind her. Taking her hands off the keyboard, she let out a sigh. Ben gets to go on a summer road trip with Grandpa. Gwen stared at her schedule. It wasn't her first time making one of these. She'd planned out her last summer ahead of time, too. The summer before that had become incredibly boring very quickly because she always felt like she had nothing to do, which was why she now tried to plan enough activities to keep her busy every day of the week. It had sort of worked before, but last summer still hadn't felt quite right. When she was younger, summers were way more fun, but things were different now. I don't spend summer with Ben anymore. They used to go to each other's houses a lot during the summer when they were both out of school. Gwen didn't know what happened, but all they ever did anymore was fight. Has it really been more than 2 years since that started? She'd tried to rectify it in the past, but it had never worked. Ben hated her, and every time she tried to talk to him, he just made her mad. So mad. But what if I went on that trip with him? They hadn't spent more than a day with each other in a long time. Maybe the reason they couldn't make up was because they'd just never given it enough time. But then again, maybe it would only make things worse. Gwen struggled with these thoughts for a while. She almost gave up on the idea, but then she took another look at her computer screen and saw the ridiculously crammed vacation schedule she was planning just to stave off boredom. I need to try. The next day, Gwen wanted to ask her father if she could join Ben and Max on their summer trip. As she searched for him, she walked into the kitchen and found her mother making dinner. "Hey, Mom. Is Dad going to be home soon?" she asked. Natalie shook her head, not looking up as she chopped vegetables. "He won't be home for dinner. He's going to be working late tonight." "Oh." Gwen was disappointed. She wanted to get this over with as soon as possible. School break was almost here, and she didn't want to wait until it was too late. Natalie looked up and saw the dejected look on her young daughter's face. "What's the matter, Gwen?" "Nothing," Gwen said. "I just wanted to ask him about something." "And what is that?" Gwen watched her mother continue preparing their dinner. It was hard to tell how much she cared what Gwen's answer would be, but she figured she wouldn't have asked if she didn't care at all. "It's about Ben and Grandpa's camping trip." Her mother didn't respond immediately, but she looked a little bothered by her mentioning them. "Why do you want to know about that?" "Well, Gwen considered saying it was nothing so she could avoid having to talk about it, but something compelled her to get it off of her chest. "I was wondering if I could maybe go with them." Natalie took another moment before replying. Gwen could tell she was choosing her words carefully. "It was my understanding that you and your cousin haven't been getting along very well lately." Gwen looked away in shame. She couldn't deny that. "Well, yeah, but..." Her mother looked at her, waiting for her to finish her sentence. When she didn't, Natalie spoke. "Would you really be able to spend all summer with Ben?" Gwen really wished she'd just waited and asked her father about this later. Her mother was much harder to read. She could be concerned, or she could be judging her for something. I wanna try," Gwen said. Natalie stared her down. Gwen was ready for her to say no and then go into a lecture about how she couldn't ask for such things at the last minute like this. But to her surprise, her mother didn't refuse her request. "Okay," she said simply, turning back to her cooking. Gwen blinked. "What?" "If you want to go on their trip with them, I'll call your grandfather tomorrow and ask him if it's all right." Gwen was stunned. "Oh, okay. Thank you, Mom." Natalie nodded. Gwen didn't want to push her luck, so she quickly left the room. The next day, Gwen was quite anxious. She knew her grandfather was a kind and generous man who would love to have her join him on his trip, but perhaps she had asked too late and he would have no choice but to refuse. "Gwen, could you come in here for a minute?" Gwen heard her mother's voice coming from the other room. "Okay, Mom." Gwen called back. When she got there, her mother was on the phone. It's your grandfather, she said, handing the phone to Gwen and stepping out of the room. Oh, Gwen said, watching her mother walk away. Grandpa, she said into the phone. Well, hey, Gwen. How are you? Max said. Gwen smiled. Hey. I'm great. How are you? I'm doing just fine, thanks. Hey, listen, I was just talking with your mother, and she had a great suggestion. You know the road trip I'm taking your cousin on this summer? Gwen's heart was beating fast. Yeah. Well, your mother thinks going camping for the summer would be a good experience for you, and she's asked me to bring you along. So, what do you think? You up for it? Gwen was confused. Mom said it was her idea. Gwen couldn't answer. She was too busy trying to figure out why her mother would do that. Now, I know you've probably got all sorts of plans for your summer break already, and I know you might think spending all summer with Ben might get on your nerves after a while, so there's no need to feel pressured to. No. Gwen interrupted him. I mean, yes. Yes, I'll come. She hoped the eagerness in her voice wasn't too obvious. Fantastic. Max seemed pleased. He gave her some details about what the living situation in the rust bucket would be like and told her what to pack. He also told her when he'd come by to pick her up after her last day of school. Sound good? Max asked as a final clarification. Yeah, that sounds great. Gwen replied genuinely. All right then. I look forward to seeing you, sweetheart. You too, Grandpa. I love you. They said their goodbyes and hung up. Gwen was so excited she jumped into the air, silently celebrating. But something was still confusing to her. Why did Mom tell Grandpa it was her idea? Did her mother know she was embarrassed about it? Was she trying to help her save face? Gwen wasn't sure if her mother had even paid enough attention to notice how strongly she felt about this, or if she cared enough to lie about it on her behalf. It didn't make any sense to her. Gwen left the room to go find her mother. She found her in the living room, reading a book. When Natalie noticed her, she looked up. Well, it's all set, Gwen said, stepping closer and handing the phone back to her. He told me he'd pick me up after school on the last day. Natalie nodded. Okay. I'll call the computer camp tomorrow and tell them you won't be coming next month. Gwen's eyes opened wide in panic. She'd completely forgotten about that. And she was sure her parents had spent good money on it already, too. Oh, right. Sorry, It's all right, her mother interrupted her. I'll be able to get a refund for most of it. Gwen was amazed. When has Mom ever been this cool about anything before? This was the kind of spoiling she'd come to expect from her father, but not from her mother. Oh. That's good, Gwen commented, not knowing what else to say. Natalie nodded. Gwen stood there for a moment. She thought about walking away and just letting a good thing be, but her mother was being so understanding and generous right now. She had to say something. And, Mom. Yes. Gwen hesitated for a second, then lurched forward and threw her arms around her mother. Thank you so much, she said, finding it hard to express just how grateful she was. Tilting her head up, she saw her mother looking down at her. She wore a tender smile that Gwen was not used to seeing on her, and she returned Gwen's hug by lovingly stroking the hair on the back of her head. I know you can't say why, but I know this is important to you, Natalie said to her daughter. So don't worry about it. Spend the summer with your grandpa, honey. It'll be an adventure. And, along the way, you might even patch things up with Ben. Gwen couldn't hide her surprise, and her mother actually laughed at the look on her face. Since when does Mom laugh? At that moment, Gwen realized something surprising. Her mother definitely understood her way better than she gave her credit for. Thanks, Mom. On the first day of summer, Gwen stood on the curb outside of her school, waiting for her grandfather. She'd left most of the stuff she was bringing at home with her parents when she said goodbye to them that morning. Max told her he'd swing by her house to pick it up on his way to get her. Everything was set, so now she waited there, nervously adjusting the straps of her backpack. Was this a bad idea? She could still hardly believe she'd decided to do this. All the work she'd put into that schedule, and she'd just thrown it away on a whim. So not me. And worse still, she hadn't come up with anything to say to Ben. They still hated each other. How long would it take to fix that? Could it be fixed in the 3 months they'd be on this trip? Could it be fixed at all? Gwen put on a smile when her grandfather's RV pulled up to the side of the curb. Max rolled down the window and waved to her. Hi there, Gwen. Hi, Grandpa. Hop on in. We still have to pick up your cousin next. Gwen opened the door and climbed inside, taking the brief moment she was obscured from her grandfather's view to rub her head with a nervous expression. In just a few minutes, she'd be face to face with Ben. The rest of the summer could be decided by that one crucial moment. After coming up to the front to give her grandfather a hug, Gwen took a seat at the table. For the next 10 minutes, she sat there patiently, waiting. Eventually, the rust bucket came to a stop. Come on, Ben. Let's go. She heard her grandfather shout, looking out the passenger side window. We're burning daylight. I wanna make it to the campsite by nightfall. Grandpa. Ben's voice sounded far away, but Gwen could hear him shouting back. A little help here. Ooh, boy, Max said. Looks like Ben's got himself caught in a tree. Really? Gwen shouted, smiling excitedly. She stood up and moved closer to the window to look outside. Sure enough, Ben and some other kid were both up in a tree, hanging by their underwear. She laughed as she watched Max head outside to help them down. Once Ben was free from his precarious position, Max led him into the rust bucket. Gwen sat back down and moved away from the window. She decided that laughing at Ben for what she'd just seen would be a poor way to start their summer together, so she was just going to pretend she hadn't seen anything. Casually crossing her legs, she rested the side of her face in her hand, propping it up with her elbow on the table while she waited for Ben to come inside. She kept her face as blank as she could in an effort to conceal how nervous she was. Footsteps coming up the stairs let Gwen know the moment was here. This is it. I've so been looking forward to this, Ben said excitedly as he rounded the corner. He was now just a few feet away from her. She sat there staring at him, waiting to see his reaction. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted her. His eyes went wide in surprise, then quickly shifted to a glare as he turned to look at her. What are you doing here? What is she doing here? He turned back to their grandfather, pointing at her accusingly. Take it easy, dweeb. This wasn't my idea. Gwen couldn't help herself. Hearing him talk that way about her, as if she didn't belong anywhere near him, it pissed her off. And, predictably, she'd immediately denied wanting to be anywhere near him either. Somebody convinced my mom that going camping for the summer would be a good experience for me. She decided to use her mother's lie to avoid letting Ben and her grandfather know it was really her idea. Then she crossed her arms defiantly and sulked back into the couch. To Ben, it probably looked like she was just mad that he was there now, but that wasn't what was going through her head. 5 seconds in, and I already blew it. She could have tried to be nice. She could have just said hello to him instead of responding to his hostility with some of her own. But, for some reason, she just couldn't bring herself to do it. Maybe because it was too embarrassing, or maybe because it wasn't in her nature to let an insult go. But either way, as far as she was concerned, she was off to a bad start. "Grandpa, please. Tell me you didn't." Ben glanced over at Gwen. She glared at him. "I thought it would be fun if your cousin came along with us this summer," Max explained. "Is that a problem?" he asked, taking on a slightly more stern expression. Ben and Gwen glanced uncertainly at each other, but said nothing. Their grandfather got back in the driver's seat, ready to get going. Ben sat down across from Gwen at the table, lying down across the couch and crossing his arms. I can't believe it. I wait all school year to go on this trip, and now the Queen of Cooties is along for the ride," he spat out bitterly, glaring at Gwen. "Hey!" Gwen spat back, returning his glare. "I had my own vacation already all planned out too, you know." Reaching into her backpack under the table, she pulled out her vacation schedule and held it up to show it to him. "Each activity is color-coded, so I never did the same thing 2 days in a row," she explained proudly, thrusting it towards Ben. He looked less impressed and more amazed by her nerdiness. "Now, I'm stuck with my geekazoid cousin going camping for 3 months." They glared at each other once more. "Geek. Jerk. Something tells me it's gonna be a long summer," Max remarked from the front seat. Ben and Gwen turned away from each other defiantly. They sat at the table in silence until they arrived at their first campsite. "Chow time," Max said, placing a bowl of wriggling white worms on the picnic table in front of Ben and Gwen. The two of them stared at the bowl nervously. "Okay. I give up." "What is that?" Ben asked, disgusted. "Marinated mealworms," Max declared proudly. "Hard to find them fresh in the States. You know, they're considered a delicacy in some countries. And totally gross in others." Gwen quipped, flinching in disgust as one of the mealworms fell out of the bowl and began crawling across the table. "If these don't sound good, I've got some smoked sheep's tongue in the fridge," Max offered. Couldn't we just have a burger or something?" Ben asked, smiling hopefully up at Maximum. Gwen mimicked his expression, hoping their puppy dog eyes would convince their grandfather to give them whatever they wanted. "Nonsense," Max said, shaking his head. "This summer's gonna be an adventure for your taste buds. I'll grab the tongue." He turned and headed back into the rust bucket. As soon as Max was out of sight, Ben slid over next to Gwen and leaned in closely. Her body stiffened and she looked at him nervously, but she tried to act cool. "Okay, I got a half-eaten bag of corn chips and a candy bar in my backpack." "What do you got?" Ben asked. Gwen was confused. After doing nothing but fighting and giving each other the cold shoulder all day, suddenly Ben was talking to her as if they were partners in crime. What's he up to? If he was trying to get along with her, Gwen couldn't pass up this chance. "Some rice cakes and hard candy," she responded. "Think we can make 'em last the whole summer?" In unison, they groaned and looked sadly at the bowl of mealworms in front of them. Even though she seemed sad on the surface, Gwen felt happy. This certainly wasn't much, but it was a start. They were on the same page about something. They had talked to each other without fighting, even if it had been just 3 or 4 sentences. She was becoming more optimistic about the situation already. Maybe some good can come out of this summer after all. Gwen knew going into it that she had no idea what would happen that summer. Maybe she and Ben would patch things up, maybe things would just get worse, maybe nothing would change at all. She'd considered lots of possibilities. But Ben finding a watch that allowed him to transform into alien superheroes was not one of them. At first, she was so mad, she had a hard time hiding it. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. All she had wanted was for her and Ben to spend the summer together like they used to. Something easy. Something simple. A chance to reconnect with her cousin. She didn't sign up to get attacked by alien robots. And the way Ben looked at that watch, that super cool, high-tech gadget that let him be the hero he'd always wanted to be, with that thing around, what chance did she have? He'd barely notice she was even there. But things that first night hadn't actually turned out that bad, as far as Gwen was concerned. In fact, she'd already considered almost everything negative that came with the Omnitrix to be worth it just to hear Ben say that one sentence after she saved him from that robot. Never thought I'd say this, but am I glad to see you. Well. Then, when Ben saved her from that falling tree, which would become the first of many times he would save her that summer, she wasn't sure what exactly she'd felt at that moment, but it gave her hope that maybe Ben really cared for her deep down after all. The next morning, Ben showed off XLR-8, the alien that would become his favorite. He ran around at super speed, cleaning up the campsite and loading everything back into the rust bucket before changing back into himself. I think this is gonna be the best summer ever, he declared. Absolutely, Max agreed. A lot of thoughts went through Gwen's head. Things were already not going according to plan, not even in the slightest. But there was progress. The watch might cause them some serious problems, but she saw potential for it to do some good. Not only from them using it to help people, but also from it bringing her and Ben closer together. Already, it had caused them to help each other in ways most people would never even get to experience. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad after all. It's definitely going to be interesting. March, Year 4, Part 1. Hey, Ben. Home. Turning his head to the side, Ben stopped walking and saw Julie coming towards him, hands casually in the pockets of her pink hoodie. Hey, Julie, he greeted her. Off to lunch? She asked. Yeah. Cool, me too. Side by side, the two of them walked to the cafeteria and got in line for lunch. I'm playing tennis with the girls after school today, Julie said. Wanna come? Nah, I got plans with the other girls. Julie smirked. Popular guy, aren't ya? Heh. Damn right, Ben said with mock smugness. But I was actually talking about my cousins. Yeah, I figured. After getting their food, they carried their trays to an open table and sat down across from each other. So, how's tennis going? Ben asked, wondering if Julie and her friends were playing for practice or just for fun. Not bad, she replied. I got a few matches coming up. Nothing major, though. Their casual conversation went on for a few minutes before one of Julie's friends showed up. Hey, ally, Julie greeted her. The other girl looked toward the door, then back at them with a somewhat serious look on her face. Were you guys near the gym today? She asked. No, Julie said. Me neither, Ben said. Why? There were a couple cop cars and an ambulance parked outside the gym earlier. What? What happened? Ben asked. I don't know. I think they're gone now though. Oh. Ben looked down and gripped his left wrist where the Omnitrix used to be. If he'd still had it, maybe he would have been more alert. He definitely would have wanted to help if something bad had happened at his own school. Ally put her backpack down by the seat next to Julie. I'm gonna go get lunch. Something wrong? Julie asked. No, Ben said, quickly taking his hand off of his wrist. The skin discoloration was still there, but it was very slight. No one would notice it unless they saw it up close or knew where to look. Julie glanced behind her back before continuing. Does it hurt? Don't ask. Sometimes, he said, lifting his hand up. He opened and closed it several times. All his fingers moved now, but the grip strength of his left hand was much weaker than his right. Not usually, though. I just can't hold on to things too tightly, that's all. Ben didn't want pity. If he were an athlete, or even just a lefty, maybe this would have been a big deal. But the worst Ben had to deal with on a regular basis was having slight difficulty holding a controller evenly. It came up now and then with other things, and it pissed him off whenever it did, but he preferred not to think about it. All that really bothered him was the loss of the Omnitrix. From the look Julie was giving him, Ben wondered if she suspected his injury meant more to him than he was letting on. She probably thought the event was more traumatizing than he was willing to admit, or maybe the watch held tremendous sentimental value to him for some reason. Luckily, she seemed to think asking any more than that would be prying too much. All right. Julie nodded. Well, let me know if you ever need help with anything. She said it casually, but the look on her face made it clear she meant more than just what she'd said. Thanks. Ben still felt bad about having to keep the secret of the Omnitrix from her, but he knew it was for the best. It wasn't like she would believe him now that he couldn't show it to her anyway. And even though he didn't want pity, it still felt good to know that she cared about him. I wonder what it would be like if we were still dating. After school, Lucy invited Ben to come hang out at her house. Gwen was at her karate class, so the two of them were watching TV to kill time before going to meet up with her afterwards. Damn, she's hot, Lucy commented, watching as one of the girls in the show did a backflip, landing in front of a vampire and stabbing it in the heart with a wooden stake. Yeah, she is, Ben agreed, also watching intently. Lucy smiled and gave him a curious side glance. It wasn't often that she heard Ben admit whether or not he found someone attractive. Admittedly, that was probably because she teased him about it all the time, but she also noticed he never did it in front of Gwen. Without her there, that must have been enough to make him comfortable with it. What do you like about her? Lucy asked. You kidding? She's so badass. As he answered, the girl on screen did a spinning kick and simultaneously threw a stake at another vampire, hitting both of them at once. Heh, that's funny. I figured you'd have said it's 'cause she's got a nice ass. Ben laughed. Well, okay, he said non-committally. Lucy leaned in close to him, smirking deviously. I didn't hear a no. Ben shook his head. Lucy, come on, now. What? There's nothing wrong with admitting it. I know, it's just, that's not the sort of thing I'm used to talking about. Lucy raised an eyebrow. You really need more guy friends. Why would I need guy friends when I got you? Lucy was taken aback for a moment. That was oddly sweet somehow. They resumed watching the show for a while, and it eventually came to a scene where 3 of the main girls were on screen at once. "All right, so be honest, which one's the hottest?" Lucy asked, deciding she might have an opportunity to assess Ben's taste in girls. Probably the witch," he said, pointing to the redhead standing on the far right of the screen. Lucy stared at him for a second. Figures he'd go for the nerdy red-headed one. It's like he doesn't even know he has a type. A wicked smile crept across her face as she got an idea. "You sure about that?" she asked. "Huh?" Lucy turned in her seat and slid across the couch, lifting herself onto Ben's lap, facing him as she straddled him. "Hey, what are you? You sure you wouldn't prefer the hot blonde? The one who's not as much of a prude?" she said teasingly, draping her arms over Ben's shoulders and leaning in closer. Ben chuckled. "Well, I can't say I wouldn't enjoy that option too," he said with a wry smile. Lucy raised an eyebrow. It seemed she'd caught him in the mood to flirt back a little this time. I'm glad to hear it," she said breathily. Sliding her hands down his body, she grabbed his hands and began to pull his arms toward her, intending to place his hands on her waist. However, in doing so, she caused Ben to glance at his watch. "Oh, wait. We gotta go meet Gwen," he said, pulling his hands free of hers. "Oh, come on." Lucy forced a giggle. "Okay," she said, sliding off of Ben's lap. "Guess we'll come back to this later." Grabbing the remote, she turned off the TV as she stood up. She tried not to feel too rejected as the 2 of them grabbed their shoes and headed out the door. "So, what do you wanna do once we get Gwen?" Lucy asked as they walked. "Hang out, dinner and a movie, maybe a romantic walk on the beach." She shot Ben a smirk, but he didn't seem to have heard her. He looked like he was spacing out. I wonder what's on his mind." "Yo, Ben," Lucy said, jabbing him in the side with her hand. "What's going on up there?" she asked, reaching up to tap him on the head. Ben flinched, then turned his attention to her. "Lucy, can I have some girl advice?" Lucy smiled excitedly. "Sure. Ask me anything." He hesitated. Do you think Julie would ever date me again?" Lucy's heart sank, but she figured that had been more likely than what she'd been thinking. "I mean, I know you don't know her, but I think I've told you about her and how she broke up with me," Ben went on. "Yeah, I know about Julie," Lucy confirmed. "Right. So, we're kinda back to being friends now, like we were before we started dating. So, I thought, maybe I could ask her out again sometime." Lucy found herself in a bind. She didn't want Ben to date Julie, or anybody who wasn't Gwen. Or herself. But she also didn't want to do anything to sabotage his love life. She knew she could just say she'd prefer to stay out of it, but that didn't feel right either. She wanted to help him if she could. There's gotta be a right way to do this. "Well, is anything different now than it was before?" Lucy asked. "What do you mean?" "There was a reason you 2 didn't work out, wasn't there?" Ben looked at the ground as he walked. He seemed a little ashamed. "She didn't like that I put Gwen before her." Lucy took a moment to consider how to continue. "If you dated her again, would that be any different?" Lucy braced herself. She was afraid he'd say yes. "No," Ben said. "I guess not." Lucy smiled. "At least he realizes how important Gwen is to him." Putting his hand to his head, Ben sighed. "Gah, why can't I just make them both happy?" he complained. Typical hero. Always trying to save everyone. After taking a moment to bask in her admiration for him, Lucy continued. It's okay, she told him. One of these days, you'll find someone you can date while making Gwen happy at the same time. I hope so, Ben said wistfully. Me too. Lucy just smiled knowingly to herself, afraid she would say something too telling if she made another comment. When they got to the building where Gwen took her karate classes, they waited for her in the parking lot. Oh, and, by the way, Ben said to Julie while they waited. Don't tell Gwen about anything we talked about today. What, about the hot girls in that Vampire Slayer show? Lucy asked, grinning playfully. Not that, Ben said. Well, yeah, that too. But also the stuff about Julie. No prob, Bob. Lucy said, putting her thumb and forefinger together and making a gesture as if she were zipping her lips. Anything you tell me stays between us. I mean it. Anything. Ben nodded. Ooh, look. There's Gwen. Lucy pointed towards the entrance of the building. Hi, Gwen. It's us. Over here. Gwen was carrying her backpack out the door. She looked over at them when she heard Lucy's voice, then held up her hands, signaling for Lucy to quit shouting. Hey, guys, Gwen greeted them when she got close. Hey. Lucy said. How was karate? Can I get your backpack for you? Pretty good. And no, Gwen said, taking off her backpack. Doofus can, though. She tossed her backpack at Ben like she was passing a basketball. Ben caught it. Yeah, nice try, he said, tossing it back at her. Gwen smirked. Worth a shot. So, Mr. Smoothie. Ben suggested, as it was their usual after karate hangout. Sounds good, Gwen agreed, putting her bag back on. Great. Lucy agreed as well, skipping along to lead the way. When they got to Mr. Smoothie, they ordered their drinks and took a seat at a table. Like she'd been doing a lot recently, Lucy waited and sat down last so she could let Gwen choose where to sit in relation to Ben. She chose to sit next to him, so Lucy took a seat on the other side of the table. Gwen gave her a grateful smile, which she silently acknowledged with a smile of her own. While they waited for their drinks, they chatted and fiddled with their phones. By the way, Gwen. If you're already a black belt, what are you still taking classes for? Ben asked. Shouldn't you be teaching them? There are different ranks of black belt, Gwen explained. Plus, it's still pretty good exercise. Different ranks, huh? Ben asked. So, what, pretty soon you'll be a super black belt? Gwen chuckled. No, I'll just get stripes on my black belt after taking more of the same kinds of tests. Although, I think next year they'll let me help teach classes for the younger kids. Lucy gasped. You mean like little tiny kids in little karate outfits jumping around trying to punch and kick stuff? Yeah, I think the youngest age group is like 6 to 8-year-olds, Gwen confirmed. Lucy squealed in excitement. That's so cute. You have to let me come see sometime. An employee from the counter called their order number. I got it, Ben said, getting up from the table. Gwen's eyes followed him as he walked away. She watched him almost dreamily now that he wasn't looking at her. Lucy smiled and let her be for a moment, then she spoke quietly. Hey, she said, getting Gwen's attention. Gwen snapped out of her daze. She looked embarrassed. Crud. I shouldn't stare. Don't worry about it, He didn't notice, Lucy assured her. Gwen glanced nervously over her shoulder. Can I talk to you later? She asked quietly, turning back to Lucy. Sure, of course. Here you go, ladies, Ben said, placing the smoothies down on the table. Oh, such a gentleman. Lucy said, giving Ben a wry smile. Pfft, screw that, Ben said, sitting back down next to Gwen. Yeah, you must be thinking of someone else, Gwen said. Lucy giggled. It's so cute when they agree like that. Ben took a sip of his smoothie and looked surprised. Whoa, he said before going back for a much bigger gulp. Gwen looked at him curiously, putting her smoothie down. How's yours? Ben took his straw out of his mouth. This is really good. What flavor is it? Blueberry mango. What? That sounds awful. No, it's actually really good. Let me try it, then Gwen said, reaching for Ben's cup. Yeah, nope. Get your own, Ben said with a smug look on his face, sliding his cup along the table away from her. Oh, come on, doofus. Just one sip, Gwen insisted. As the two of them fought, Lucy contentedly slurped her smoothie, eyes darting back and forth between them like she was watching a tennis match. This is the best thing ever. All right, fine. Here. Ben eventually gave in and placed his smoothie on the table between them. Gwen took her straw out of her cup and put it in Ben's. She leaned in and began to sip from it. On the other side, Ben leaned in and did the same with his straw. Lucy perked up at the scene before her. Thinking quickly, she pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of them. Oh, she said to herself, looking at how the picture came out. Gwen glanced over at her and noticed what Lucy was doing. She leaned back and started to say something, but she started coughing. Geez, that bad? Ben said, pulling his cup away from her. Well, I like it. No, it's fine, Gwen said, taking her hand off of her mouth as her coughing stopped. Just went down the wrong pipe. She reached over and grabbed her straw out of Ben's cup, returning it to her own. Subtly, she gave Lucy an unamused look, letting her know she wasn't happy about that picture. Lucy smiled apologetically, putting her phone away. Later, after they'd all finished their drinks, the three of them walked back outside. So, what do we wanna do next? Ben asked. Gwen and Lucy glanced at each other. I actually really need to work on a project tonight, Gwen said. So I think I'll head home. And I'm helping her with it, so I'm going with her, Lucy joined in. Darn. Okay. Well, want me to walk you guys home? Ben offered. No, we're good, Gwen said, shaking her head along with Lucy. Thanks, though. All right. Well, night, dweeb. Night, Lucy. Ben split off from them and set off towards his own house. Gwen and Lucy walked together without saying much at first. Once they felt they were a safe enough distance from Ben, Lucy spoke up. So, what did you want to talk to me about? Well, first of all, delete that freaking picture. Oh, come on. Lucy moaned. She took out her phone and brought up the picture of Ben and Gwen sharing a smoothie. I wasn't gonna show it to anyone. I just thought it was really cute. Gwen leaned over so she could see the picture, then took a moment to study Lucy's reaction to it. You really don't think there's anything weird about it? Like, if I were with Ben? Like that? She asked in a quiet voice. Not at all, Lucy assured her, shaking her head. You can fall in love with anyone you want. Gwen seemed a little embarrassed about being told she was in love, but she sighed relentingly. All right. You can keep the picture. Eh. Thanks, Gwen. She cheered, fist pumping as she put her phone back into her pocket. So what else did you want to talk about? Gwen stared at the ground as she walked. I want to try hanging out with Ben again. Like, just me and him. Lucy nodded. Ever since Gwen had told her how she felt about Ben, she'd been spending a lot of time with him again. However, she would always ask Lucy to come along as well since she was still too uncomfortable to be alone with him. That's good, Lucy said, patting Gwen on the back reassuringly. But not like a date. Gwen quickly clarified. I know, Lucy said. But still, it's good. I'm glad to hear you're starting to feel comfortable around him again. Gwen nodded. Does this mean you're, over him? Lucy asked. Gwen shook her head. No. Not at all. But I want things to go back to normal. Or at least as normal as I can get it. Lucy nodded understandingly, encouraging Gwen to go on. I still don't know if I could date him, but I haven't really thought that much about it. I don't think he'd ever want to anyway. Lucy wanted to say something. She knew Ben was thinking about dating again, and if he wasn't going to get back together with Julie, he'd find someone else eventually. If Gwen wanted to date him, she needed to figure that out sooner rather than later if she wanted a chance. The thought of Gwen having to watch Ben date another girl was something Lucy couldn't stand. But I can't say anything. This wasn't something that was safe to rush, and she'd already promised herself she would only try to support Gwen, not direct her. Okay. That's good. Don't stress too much about it. Just get together with Ben sometime and try to have fun like you always do, Lucy said. Gwen nodded, still clearly very troubled and deep in thought. However, when she turned and gave Lucy a grateful smile, she got the feeling things might just work out after all. I have a good feeling about this. Ben yawned, stretching his arms as he leaned back on the couch. It was the weekend, and he'd spent all day lazing around the house. He had homework to do, but he didn't want to do it. However, he realized he'd have to do it on Sunday if he didn't do it today, and he was already running out of ways to procrastinate. So, after watching one more episode of a show he didn't even really like, he finally gave in and headed upstairs. Just as he was sitting down to do some work, his phone vibrated. Phew. Relieved to have another distraction, he took his phone out of his pocket. It was Gwen. Hey, dweeb, he answered. Hey, Ben, came Gwen's voice. Do you wanna maybe go bowling tonight? Ben thought she sounded strange. Usually her requests to hang out were more like demands. She seemed much less sure of herself than she usually did. Bowling? Ben asked. Yeah. There's a new bowling alley that opened up near the arcade a couple weeks ago. Lucy told me about it, Gwen explained. So, do you wanna go? She asked again. Sure. All right, Ben agreed. Did Lucy wanna come too? I already asked her and she said she was busy. Okay. Well, when did you wanna go? Ben asked. If you wanna go soon, I can get a ride from my mom. Yeah, I was gonna get a ride too. You wanna meet there in, like, half an hour? And they have food and stuff too if you haven't had dinner yet. Okay, cool. I'll see you in a bit then. Great. Gwen's voice wavered a bit, and she coughed to clear her throat. See you then. She hung up. Ben held his phone away from him and stared at it questioningly. Okay. Gwen's acting a little weird. He thought about it for another minute. It occurred to him that this was another situation that would probably look like a date to anyone who didn't know them. A teenage boy and a teenage girl going out for a fun couples activity. It does seem like the kind of thing I used to do with Julie. Ben immediately regretted that thought. Without meaning to, he suddenly pictured himself and Gwen on all sorts of dates he'd been on with Julie. Dinners, movies, the boardwalk, the arcade, the park, places all over town. And worse still, he realized he'd taken Gwen to all of those places too. It's like we're... Ben rubbed his face with his hands exasperatedly, wishing he didn't have such embarrassing thoughts about Gwen. He knew people must make that mistake about them all the time. He didn't exactly dislike being mistaken for her boyfriend, especially since, according to Lucy, she was pretty popular with guys. Probably because she was smart, and strong, and pretty, and... She's your cousin, man. Ben sighed. Gwen had a lot of good qualities, many of which he could admire. But given their relationship, some of those qualities were kind of off limits. And they could be tough to ignore sometimes, especially with people like Lucy reminding him of them. Just forget about it. Ben did his best to shrug it off. After grabbing his wallet and his phone, he went downstairs to ask his mother if she would give him a ride to the bowling alley. About half an hour later, Ben arrived with an extra bit of allowance from his mother. He found Gwen outside the building's entrance, pacing back and forth. He'd seen her like this several times before, usually when she had a big test the next day. It looked like she was going over mountains of information inside her head to make sure she'd get everything right. She was so absorbed in whatever she was thinking about that she didn't even notice Ben when he walked right up to her. "Ah, Gwen?" he asked, reaching out to tap her on the shoulder. "Ah." Gwen jumped back in surprise. "Oh, it's you," she said, standing up straight and composing herself. "Sorry, I was thinking about something." Ben raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" Gwen reached out with one arm, holding her hand in front of Ben's face. "What are you, Al?" Gwen lightly smacked his forehead with her fingertips before pulling her hand away. "None of your business," she said nonchalantly. Ben held his hands out incredulously. "Seriously? Come on, doofus. Let's go inside already," Gwen said, turning to walk towards the entrance. There were a lot of other people inside the bowling alley, mostly families and groups of friends. However, Ben and Gwen didn't recognize anyone, even the other teenagers who looked closest to them in age. Despite how many people were there, a couple of lanes were still open, and Ben and Gwen were able to rent one for a while. After paying the fee, they took the shoes they were given and went to sit down at the booth in front of their lane. "Ah, why do they always make you wear these weird shoes?" Ben complained, struggling to tie the strangely colored bowling shoes he'd borrowed. "I know, right?" Gwen agreed, also trying to put hers on. It had been a while since the two of them had gone bowling, but the shoes were something they'd both always found annoying. Afterwards, they entered their names into the console that would be keeping score, and they were ready to begin. "So, you ready to get destroyed?" Ben asked, picking up a bowling ball. "You always say that, but I'm still waiting for it to happen," Gwen said. They smiled at each other, that old competitive look returning to their eyes. Ben stepped up to the line and made an attempt to roll the bowling ball the way he'd been taught when he was younger. It made it almost to the pins before it fell into the left gutter. "Ah, damn it," he complained, going to pick up another one from the ball return. Nice gutter ball, Gwen commented. Shut it, dweeb. Ben stepped up again and rolled the second ball. This time, it made it all the way to the end and knocked over a single pin. Am I getting destroyed yet? Gwen asked. All right, let's see you do it, Ben said, sitting down at the booth. My pleasure, Gwen said, standing up and walking over to grab a bowling ball. She fumbled with it as she picked it up, as if she'd underestimated how heavy it would be. Heavier than it looks, huh? Ben smirked. Gwen ignored him. She stood behind the line and gave it a try. Her first ball did the exact same thing Ben's did, rolling almost to the end before falling off into the gutter on the left. Not so easy, is it? Ben enjoyed seeing her fail after she'd taunted him about his own failure at the exact same thing. Just you watch, Gwen said. I'll be getting strike after strike by the end of this. Taking her second ball, she tried again. This time, she knocked down 3 pins. And, boom! Gwen takes an early lead. She cheered, pumping her fist. She walked back over to Ben and stood in front of him, arms crossed and smiling smugly. Your turn. Ben stared at her for a second, then started laughing. Man, we suck at this. Gwen joined in, laughing as well. Yeah, we do. They continued taking turns for a while. They got better the more they played, to the point where they could bowl spares now and then. Ben even got a strike at one point, which made him feel rather superior. At one point, Ben was feeling a bit cocky when his next turn came up. As he was bragging to Gwen, he picked up a bowling ball and tried to hold it up with just his left hand. All of a sudden, he stopped talking mid-sentence as his arm began to shake under the weight of the ball. He panicked, trying to reach for it with his right hand, but he dropped it. The heavy ball hit the ground with a loud bang, but luckily he managed to jump back so it wouldn't land on his foot. Shit, Ben muttered, looking around. He was embarrassed, and he hoped not many people had seen that. Then his eyes fell on Gwen. He was expecting her to be smirking and preparing to trash talk him for his poor display, but she wasn't. She was staring at him, switching her gaze between his arm and his face, concerned rather than amused. My left arm. Ben realized what she must have been thinking. Hey, oops, he said, trying to laugh it off. Ben. Gwen said quietly. Relax. Won't happen again, he attempted to assure her, picking the ball back up. He went back to bowling and filled his next frame like nothing out of the ordinary had happened, trying his best not to make Gwen worry. I'm fine. Gwen didn't say anything about the incident afterwards, but she became noticeably more reserved. They continued to be competitive for the remainder of the night, but Gwen's playful insults stopped almost completely. Once their game was finished, Gwen called her father and asked if he could give her a ride home. Frank accepted, offering Ben a ride as well, so the two of them went outside to wait on a bench near the bowling alley. Well, guess we can put another win for me up on the scoreboard, Ben said, leaning back and stretching. BS, Gwen said. I scored way more consistently than you. Half your shots were gutter balls. And the other half were amazing. Ben smiled smugly, waiting for Gwen's clever response. When she didn't say anything, he looked to his left and found her staring at his arm. Goddamn. It's fine, he said, covering his left arm with his right hand. Gwen placed her hands on his arm and looked him in the eyes. Ben. Let me see it. I told you, it's. Ben. Gwen ordering him around was nothing new. He'd been through it enough times to know when she wasn't about to back down on something. But there was something different about the way she held his gaze this time. She wasn't glaring, she didn't look angry, all of the resolve was still there, but something else was there too. He just couldn't tell what it was. Sighing, Ben moved his right hand away, relenting to her demands. Gwen pulled his left arm over and held it in front of her, examining it. Without a word, she undid the strap of his watch and took it off of him, putting it down on the bench. Then she placed her fingertips on his wrist and slowly slid them across the slightly discolored area. "It looks a lot better," she said softly. "It is a lot better," Ben insisted. Gwen sat there silently for a moment, still staring at his arm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It wasn't your fault," Ben said. "None of it was." Gwen turned to look him in the eyes again. "Do you miss it?" Ben knew she meant the Omnitrix, or being a hero, or both. "Of course I do." He was about to say so, but a wave of nostalgia hit him all of a sudden. He thought back to the day he found it. How amazed he was. How much fun he had changing into all those different aliens. All the good he managed to do. How important it made him feel. Before he knew it, his eyes were watering. An intense wave of emotion he didn't even know he'd been holding back threatened to overtake him. "Yes," Ben said, choking back a sob. "I miss it." He felt Gwen take his hand in hers, holding it tightly. With her other arm, she reached over and put a hand on his back, rubbing it gently. Ben covered his eyes with his free hand, unable to stop himself from quietly sobbing. This was too sudden. It had all caught him completely off guard. He didn't like crying in front of anyone, especially Gwen. Sorry," he said, trying to calm himself down. "It's okay," Gwen said gently. "It's okay." When he finally stopped weeping, Ben hunched over on the bench. His face had redness around his eyes, and he stared at the ground solemnly. Gwen took her hand off of his back, but continued to hold his hand. "I'm sorry," she apologized yet again. "I never blamed you," Ben told her. "For the Omnitrix. It wasn't your fault. It was all Vilgax's." He took a deep breath, and unconsciously gripped Gwen's hand tightly. "I miss the Omnitrix. I miss having a fully functioning left hand. But if I had to choose again, I'd still give them both up for you every time." "Ben." He turned his head. The look in Gwen's eyes told him she had a lot to say to him. He wondered if what he'd said had been a little too much, or maybe he'd screwed up and made her feel even more guilty. However, he didn't get a chance to hear whatever it was she had to say, because he recognized her father's car driving up to them from behind her. "Shit." Ben quickly pulled his hand away from hers, semi-consciously realizing he didn't want anyone to walk in on this scene. "What?" Gwen turned around. She seemed to have the same idea, because she stood up quickly and nervously began fixing her clothes. She didn't say anything else, but she and Ben looked at each other again, having one last silent conversation before the car pulled up beside them. Ben could tell she still wanted to tell him something, but instead, she sighed to herself and opened the car door. "Hi, Dad," Gwen greeted her father. "Hey, Uncle Frank," Ben said, sliding into the back seat with her after she moved over. "Hi, kids," Frank greeted them both. They started driving back to Ben's house, and Gwen's father began asking them about their night. While they were talking, Ben heard Gwen's phone vibrate. He watched her pull it out of her pocket and read a text. She smiled slightly. "Who's that?" Ben asked curiously. Gwen flinched. Just Lucy, she said, typing out her response. Oh yeah. What's she want? Gwen smiled, but she looked strangely bashful. Nothing. Ben knit his brow. What are they up to? March, Year 4, Part 2. HMHMHM hum, HMHMHM hum. Lucy sat at her kitchen table, eating a sandwich while doing some homework. She had her headphones in, and she was humming along to the song she was listening to, bobbing her head contentedly. After Gwen had gotten home from her not date with Ben the night before, Lucy had texted back and forth with her a bit, and Gwen had told her all about her night. As far as Lucy could tell, everything had gone great, and she was still in a good mood from the news. It sounded like they'd even had a nice little bonding moment just before Gwen's dad picked them up. Gwen hadn't seemed willing to give her all the details about that part, but Lucy could tell it had had an effect on her. So, not only had they had a good time hanging out as best friends once again, but the night's events had also likely pushed Gwen a little closer to her decision to date Ben. Lucy giggled to herself at the thought, unable to hold in her excitement. I'm so frigging happy for them. Hey, kid. Lucy looked up to see Joel walking into the room. Hey, Joel, she said, plucking out her headphones and giving him a happy smile. Joel seemed amused by the look of excitement on the girl's face. Well, looks like somebody just got some good news. He speculated. Yaha. Lucy confirmed, nodding vigorously. What was it? Joel asked, walking across the kitchen to start making his own lunch. I'll never tell, Lucy said, giggling deviously. Joel laughed. Come on, now. Don't leave me in the dark. Got a new boyfriend? Girlfriend? Nah, Lucy said, shaking her head. Still. You used to get a new one every other week. Don't tell me you're slowing down on me, he said, giving Lucy the same cheeky grin she was giving him. Well, you don't know what I get up to in my free time. Not sure I want to, he said, tousling her hair as he walked past her to take a seat at the table. The two of them chatted for a couple minutes while they ate, but they were interrupted when Lucy's phone began to vibrate. She picked it up and looked at the screen. Ben was calling her. Phone call, gotta go, love you. Lucy said quickly, hopping out of her chair. She gave Joel a kiss on the cheek before cramming the rest of her sandwich into her mouth and running out of the room. When she got upstairs, Lucy opened up her phone and answered it. MHHMMH. Finish chewing your food, Lucy. Ben's voice came through the phone. MMHMHH. Ah. Good stuff. So, what's up, Ben? Hi, Lucy. Listen, can I have some more girl advice? Is it happening? Lucy felt a spark of excitement. Maybe something about last night had made Ben consider his feelings for Gwen as well. Sure. Ask away, lover boy. Well, do you think it would be okay for me to ask out one of Julie's friends? Or is that uncool? Oh, come on. When Lucy didn't answer immediately, Ben explained further. I mean, at this point, I think I know them pretty well, and they like me, so I was thinking about asking out her friend Christina. All right, here we go. Well, do you think Julie would be okay with that? Lucy asked. I don't really know. But, she's the one who broke up with me, so it's not like she'd be jealous of Christina or anything, right? Well, she may not be jealous exactly, but you don't think that might be kinda uncomfortable for her? Or maybe Christina might feel bad about it. I guess. I'm not saying you can't, Lucy clarified. But maybe you should ask Julie first. And then, even if she says yes, still keep that in mind. She might say she's okay with it because she thinks it's the right thing to do, but that wouldn't necessarily mean she is okay with it, know what I mean? Yeah, I guess you're right. This seems way too complicated. I'll think about it, but I think maybe I'll just drop the whole thing. Okay, Lucy said. Sorry. I know that probably wasn't the answer you wanted to hear. No, it's cool, Ben said. Thanks for the help. No problem, cause. And good luck. Keep an eye out. There's lots of other girls out there. Hey, Lucy, are there 2 secret words that are all I need to know? Ben asked. Lucy knit her brow in confusion. What? What you just said reminded me of something. Are there 2 secret words? Lucy giggled, getting the general idea of what was going on here. Yeah, totally. But I'm not allowed to tell you. Ben chuckled. Okay, never mind. Anyway, thanks again. See ya. Bye. Lucy said cheerfully. After he hung up, she sighed and buried her face in her hands. This isn't good. Ben was still looking for a new girlfriend. And sooner or later, he was gonna find one. If Gwen kept being indecisive like this, she was going to miss her chance. I really don't want to rush her, but she's running out of time. Lucy paced back and forth in her room, just as she'd often seen Gwen do. This was a difficult decision to make. She'd already interfered so much, and it hadn't always gone the way she wanted. Warning Gwen that Ben might start dating someone else soon might end up putting unnecessary pressure on her, and that could ruin everything. But, on the other hand, doing nothing could mean Gwen missing her chance, and then she'd be miserable for who knows how long. It's okay. There's a right way to do this. There's gotta be. Lucy picked up her phone again and called Gwen. It rang a few times before she answered. Hey, Lucy, Gwen greeted her, sounding more upbeat than usual. Hey, Gwen. Lucy decided not to get down to business right away. You wanna hang out today? I'm not sure if I can. I've still got a lot of homework to do, so I don't think my mom will let me stay out late tonight. Please? Just for a bit. We don't even have to go out anywhere. I just wanna see you. And I kinda got something I need to talk to you about. What is it? Gwen asked. It's about Ben. Well, all right. Hang on. I'm gonna ask my mom. Lucy was relieved. She didn't want to have a conversation about this over the phone. In person, she'd be able to comfort Gwen much more easily if necessary. Luckily, it seemed Gwen also preferred to discuss it in person. She said yes, but you can't stay after dinner, Gwen said after a bit. So, come over whenever. Great. Lucy said. See ya soon. See ya. Lucy went back downstairs. Joel was still in the kitchen, finishing up his lunch. Hey Joel, can I get a ride to Gwen's? Lucy asked, putting her hands together pleadingly and smiling at him hopefully. She lived close enough to walk to Gwen's house, but she wanted to get there as soon as possible. To Gwen's. Weren't you in the middle of something here? Joel asked, pointing to the books Lucy had left out on the table. I'll finish it tonight. Promise. Joel hesitated for a moment, then he shrugged. All right, then. Yippee. Lucy cheered. She charged at Joel and threw herself into a hug. You're the best. Joel laughed and hugged her back. By the way, if the homework you were doing is from a class you have with Gwen, maybe you should bring it with you, he suggested. Good idea, Lucy agreed. She and Gwen were both pretty capable of figuring this stuff out on their own, but if Gwen's mom was so insistent she get it done, they'd be able to get it done quicker between the two of them. A few minutes later, Lucy said goodbye to Joel as he dropped her off at Gwen's house. Holding onto the straps of her backpack, she skipped down the walkway and up the steps to Gwen's front door. Ding dong, she said out loud as she pressed the button for the doorbell. The door opened after a moment. Hiya, Gwen, Lucy said cheerfully, going in for a hug. How's my first and third favorite redhead? Hi, Lucy. I'm on the list twice. Gwen returned the hug, seeming confused by Lucy's ramblings. Oh, no. You're on their way more than just twice. Lucy giggled, giving Gwen a kiss on the cheek. Okay. Gwen laughed nervously, lightly pushing Lucy off of her. She looked around to make sure her parents weren't nearby. So, you wanna come up to my room? Oh, Gwen. So bold. Lucy smirked, shooting Gwen some bedroom eyes. To talk, you perv. Can't do both. Get out. All right, I'll stop. Lucy gave one last giggle, then followed Gwen up to her room. Once there, she took off her backpack while Gwen closed the door behind them. Joel said I should bring my homework in case we wanted to help each other with it, Lucy said, explaining why she had her backpack with her. Plus I know your mom was being stingy about it, so. Gwen nodded, grabbing her desk chair and turning it around to sit down in it. She didn't seem to be paying much attention to what Lucy was saying. Lucy noticed she had a worried expression on her face, which she figured was probably because she knew what she was going to ask about. Following Gwen's lead, Lucy sat down on the edge of the bed, facing her. Okay, she said, deciding to get started. Well, first of all, how was last night? They'd already texted back and forth about it a bit, but Lucy wanted to hear more about it in person too. Gwen smiled. It was nice. It really felt like Ben and I were just hanging out like we used to. And was that all it felt like? Lucy asked. Gwen hesitated for a second, then nervously scratched the side of her head and looked away as she answered. I don't know, we talked a little about something that, it kind of reminded me why I like him so much in the first place, she admitted. That's a good sign. So have you given it any more thought? You know, like, whether or not you wanna try dating him? Lucy. Gwen started to speak, then took a moment to gather her thoughts. Look, it's not that I don't want to, it's just, it's so risky. Like, this whole thing, it's so weird. And I can't risk freaking Ben out, okay? Not after we've come this far. I really. Gwen took a deep breath and shuddered a little. I don't want to lose him again, she said, her voice so quiet it was nearly a whisper. So, does that mean you'll never try? Maybe not never, Gwen said. Maybe if he showed some interest in me like that. But right now, he doesn't seem like he thinks of me that way. Like, at all. Lucy knew that couldn't be true, but she couldn't think of a reason that would be convincing enough. Gwen, look, I totally get where you're coming from, I do. But, I'm just worried that you might miss your chance and end up regretting it, Lucy said. Gwen looked at her questioningly. Ben's been asking me for girl advice recently, Lucy admitted, hoping Ben wouldn't be mad if he ever found out about this. Gwen opened her eyes a little wider, looking worried. First he was thinking about trying to get back together with Julie, and then he was thinking about getting together with one of her friends, and now I don't know who he's after. But the point is, he's looking for someone. And if you don't take a shot at him soon, well, you might miss your chance. At least for a while. Please let this be the right way to do this. Lucy was instantly worried about rushing her, but this felt like the right thing to do. Gwen put her hand to her head, rubbing her temple as she thought about this news. Her foot tapped rapidly. Looking a little panicked, she stood up and started pacing. Do you think you can deal with Ben dating someone else? Can you wait until they break up before deciding to go for him yourself? Lucy asked, fully aware that she was pushing pretty hard at this point. I don't know. Gwen stumbled out an answer, still pacing around her room. Were you okay with Ben dating Julie? No. Lucy flinched in surprise. Gwen had abruptly stopped pacing, turning to face her, and she'd shouted her answer rather loudly. I hated it. I hated it. Gwen yelled. Shh. Shh. Lucy signaled for Gwen to lower her voice, glancing nervously at the door. I'm supposed to be the most important girl in his life. Gwen's face distorted into a miserable expression and she collapsed to her knees. Lucy stood up and ran across the room, crouching down in front of her. She put her hands on Gwen's shoulders, ready to comfort her again. But I know that's selfish, Gwen said quietly. It's obsessive, and clingy, and self-centered, and I have no right to tell him who he can and can't date. I need to let him do what makes him happy. You're already the most important girl in his life, Lucy assured her. You don't need to date him to know that. But I want him to know it, Gwen said. I want to hear him say it. Have you ever told him exactly how much he means to you? I guess not, no. Gwen said, looking ashamed. It's a difficult thing to do. Lucy looked at Gwen very seriously. Believe me, I know. Gwen remained quiet for a moment. Her breathing was heavy, but Lucy could tell she was just working up the courage to say what she wanted to say. Look, you want Ben to be with someone who makes him happy, right? Lucy asked. Well, that can be you, Gwen. You already make him happier than anyone. You just need to tell him. Tell him how you feel. I want to tell him, she said. I need to tell him. Lucy felt herself being filled with hope. You mean you're gonna? Yes, Gwen said, standing up with a look of determination on her face. I'm going to do it. I'm going to ask Ben out. Lucy stood up with her. Slowly, her smile got wider and wider. She took a deep breath, then hugged Gwen and pressed her face into her chest to muffle her excited squealing. When she looked back up, there were tears in her eyes. Hey, what are you crying for? Gwen asked, confused. I'm just so happy. Lucy began to giggle with excitement again. Gwen smiled, but after a moment, she put her hand to her head. Oh, boy, she said, stumbling over to her bed and sitting down on the edge of it. What? What is it? You okay, Gwen? Lucy asked, following her. Yeah, I'm fine, Gwen said. Just, kinda light-headed. I know I just said I'd do it, but, like, what that means is kinda hitting me now. No need to be scared, Lucy assured her. I'll have your back every step of the way. Even though Gwen wanted to get this over with as soon as possible, it still took her a couple days to get the timing just right. When she was ready, she sent a simple text to Ben to get everything started. Meet me in the woods where we used to spar. Why? Was Ben's response. Just do it. Fine. Gwen understood his confusion. It was the middle of the night, on a school night no less, and Gwen wasn't usually the one to initiate any of their sneaking out at night activities. In fact, neither of them had done anything like that recently. It was more common back when Ben still had the Omnitrix and he wanted to do a little late-night crime fighting. They hadn't been to that little clearing in the woods where they used to spar since he lost the Omnitrix either. When she sent that text, Gwen and Lucy were already there, hiding in the trees off to the side of the clearing. Gwen was breathing heavily and her heart was beating like crazy when she put her phone away. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this, Gwen said out loud, staring out into the clearing as she had another mild freak out. Lucy placed a hand on Gwen's shoulder. Just try to relax. Everything's gonna be alright. I'll be right here waiting for you the whole time. I promise. Gwen brought her arm across her chest to grip Lucy's hand. She turned to her and gave her a grateful smile. Thanks, Lucy. I don't think I'd be able to do this without you. Lucy beamed with pride. Don't mention it, cause she said. Here, why don't we sit for a bit? It might be a while before Ben gets here. Gwen nodded weakly, and together they sat down with their backs against a tree. It wasn't long before Gwen was worriedly staring off into the distance again, so Lucy put her arm around her and pulled her in, guiding her to lean her head on her shoulder. You can do this. I know you can, Lucy whispered softly into Gwen's ear. Gwen lied there silently. I can do this. I can do this. She felt Lucy gently stroking her hair. When he gets here, do you want me to watch? Or should I just hide and wait for you to come get me if you need me? Lucy asked. You can watch, Gwen said after a moment's hesitation. If it goes badly, I don't want to have to explain what happened. Plus, I know you want to watch anyway. Lucy giggled. Yep. I'm nosy like that. They both lied there in silence for a couple minutes before Gwen spoke again. Do you really think he'll say yes? Gwen asked quietly. Yes, I do, Lucy answered without hesitation. Gwen sighed. I wish I could be as certain as you are. He loves you, Gwen. And even if he won't date you, he'll still love you. Trust me. Gwen didn't say anything else. She wanted so badly to believe everything Lucy was telling her, but she just couldn't help fearing the worst. He's here, Lucy said. Gwen sat upright and turned around. Sure enough, there he was. You remember what you're going to say? Lucy asked. You act like I haven't already rehearsed it in front of the mirror 50 times, Gwen said. Sounds like you. Lucy stood up and helped Gwen to her feet. Good luck. And remember, I'll be right here the whole time. Gwen nodded. Thank you, Lucy. For everything. Without thinking, she did what Lucy had often done to her, leaning forward to give her a kiss on the cheek. Lucy was uncharacteristically speechless, but she gave Gwen an encouraging smile as her hand moved to feel her cheek where she'd kissed her. Gwen took another deep breath, then slowly walked out into the clearing. Ben was standing in the middle of the grass, checking his phone and looking around. It was dark out, but it was still light enough to see. When he spotted her, he waved at her and put his phone away. They walked towards each other until they were only a few feet apart. Hey, dweeb. So, what are we doing out here? Ben asked. We can't exactly spar like we used to. Gwen stood across from him, holding his gaze determinedly. She tried to hide how nervous she was by keeping her face as blank as possible, but she could feel her hands trembling. "Gwen?" Ben asked after a few seconds of her staring at him. "Ben, sit with me for a moment." Gwen turned to the side and sat down on the grass, looking up at him and patting the ground next to her. Ben knit his brow, clearly unsure what to expect. Okay." Nevertheless, he sat down next to her, leaning back casually and propping himself up with his arms behind him. Gwen pulled her knees in and wrapped her arms around them, unconsciously curling up in a defensive position. She'd come this far, but she hadn't really started yet, and the anticipation was getting to her. Leaning her head back and looking up into the night sky, she tried to calm herself down a bit more before she started talking again. "You didn't drag me all the way out here just to go stargazing, did ya?" Ben asked. "No, doofus." Gwen put her head back down and stared at the ground in front of her. "Then what are we doing out here?" Gwen hesitated for a few seconds more, then finally began. "Do you remember that time, back when we were little, when we were playing in the street and I fell and scraped my knee?" Ben looked at her, but she couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze at the moment. "What?" he asked. "You saw the blood, and you got scared because you thought that meant I was gonna die. So you picked me up and ran, carrying me all the way home, saying over and over how you were gonna save me." Ben scratched his chin, probably a little embarrassed by the mention of a childhood memory. I think I kinda remember something like that. I don't really remember stuff from when we were really young that well." "And do you remember when my cat died?" Gwen continued, ignoring Ben's response. "I cried like a baby, so you tried to cheer me up, saying you'd do whatever it took to make things better." "Heh, really?" Ben chuckled. "Sounds like something I would have said." "And then, when you got the Omnitrix, after playing with it for a little, one of the very first things you used it for was saving me. You saved me over and over again that summer, and every summer after that," Gwen went on. Ben smiled smugly. "Well, what can I say? That's just what we heroes do. Try to have a little modesty, doofus." "Okay, geez." There was a moment of silence. Ben still didn't seem to have any idea what they were doing there. Keeping her breathing calm, Gwen mentally prepared herself for the rest of what she had to say. "You saved me, too," Ben said. "Probably more than I saved you." "We've fluctuated a lot," Gwen said. "What?" "I wish I could say we've always been together, but we haven't. There've been so many times when we've gone months or even years without even talking to each other." "Gwen, are you going away somewhere?" Ben asked. He sounded slightly panicked all of a sudden. Gwen turned to face him for the first time since they'd sat down. "What? Is that why you brought me out here? To tell me you're moving? Or you're gonna be going to high school abroad or something?" He was managing to hide it pretty well, but the look in his eyes showed just how scared he was of that idea. No. I'm not going anywhere." Gwen waved her hands and gave him an apologetic look. "That's not what this is. Just let me finish, okay?" Ben sighed with relief. "Okay." Gwen turned back away from him, finding it easier to talk that way. "What I was saying was, every time we've been separated, I've been miserable. And the time I've spent with you, our childhood, our summer trips, the last couple years we've been best friends, it's been amazing." "Are you dying?" "Ben, no. Will you just let me finish, doofus?" Okay, sorry." Gwen laughed lightly to herself. Even after all these years, you still drive me crazy. You're arrogant, obnoxious, stubborn, dense, reckless, and one hell of a whiner. Gee, thanks. Gwen turned and smiled gently at him. But you're also kind, and sweet. You think a lot of your own ability, but you try to use that ability to help others. You're stubborn, but that's only because you're always trying to do what's right. And even back when you acted like you hated me, you were willing to risk everything to help me without hesitation. Ben just stared at her. He seemed like he was unsure how to handle being praised so highly right after being insulted. Gwen once again turned to stare at the ground in front of her while she talked. I know I don't always act like it, but I'm always happy when I'm around you, and I can't stand it when we're separated. You're the most important person in the world to me. She took one last long, deep breath before saying the rest. Here goes nothing. I love you, Ben Tennyson. She paused for a second to let that sink in, both for him and for herself. Not just as a cousin. Not just as a best friend. I mean, I really love you. Will you please go out with me? There it was. She'd said it out loud. And she'd said it to Ben. There was no going back now. So she sat there, squeezing her legs tightly, absolutely petrified. She waited for Ben to respond, but he said nothing. She wasn't looking at him either, so she had no idea how he was reacting. After nearly a minute of getting no response, she shuddered in fear, tears welling up in her eyes. Well? Gwen asked. Say something, will ya? She turned to look at him, fighting back her frustration. Ben was staring at her in disbelief. He didn't look disgusted or freaked out, just confused and surprised, like he was unsure if what he'd just heard was real. Ben, come on. Gwen urged him to respond once more. Ben blinked like he was being shaken out of a daze. I mean, what do you want me to say? He asked. That you love me too, or that I'm a freak, or whichever it is. Well, of course I love you, but not like that. I don't know. Gwen, we're cousins. Don't you think I know that? Can cousins even do that? Well, I sure can. Now come on. I just asked you out. Yes or no? Gwen, I don't know, Ben insisted. Is that really the best you can do for me? Gwen stood up angrily. I just poured my fucking heart out here, took, probably the biggest risk I'll ever take, and all you can give me is that non-committal bullshit. Ben scrambled to his feet, his confused expression turning into one of anger. Hey now, this isn't my fault. This came out of fucking nowhere, and you know it. How the hell do you expect me to know what to say? Gwen stood there staring at him for a moment, breathing heavily, feeling like she was on the verge of either crying or exploding in anger. But just when she was about to lose it, her rational side took over. Wait. You fucked this up enough already. Just get out of there before you make it even worse. She was still angry, and she was still more terrified than she'd been in forever, but she knew this wouldn't end well if it just turned into them screaming at each other all night. So, gathering every ounce of willpower she had, Gwen abruptly turned away from him and stormed off. Gwen, wait! Ben shouted from behind her. No! Fearing he was following her, Gwen started running towards the woods. Once she made it to the tree line, she saw Lucy step out from her hiding place. She didn't feel like talking to her right now either, so she just kept running. Gwen, wait! Lucy called out to her as she passed by. Gwen ignored her too, but unlike with Ben, she heard footsteps behind her. Gwen was fast, but Lucy was faster, so the chase only went a small distance deeper into the woods. After Lucy caught up to her, she reached out and grabbed Gwen by the shoulder. "Get the hell off me!" Gwen stopped running, but she spun around and shoved Lucy's hand away. Lucy stepped back and held her hands up disarmingly. "Gwen, please, wait. It's okay. 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 No, Lucy. No, it is not okay." Gwen yelled angrily as tears streamed down her face. "You saw what happened. I told him how I felt, and it just made him mad." "He's not mad at you. He's just confused," Lucy calmly argued. "That was a lot to spring on a person all at once. He hasn't even rejected you yet. Just give him some time to process it, okay?" Gwen was nearly hyperventilating, glaring at Lucy through watery eyes. "So what am I supposed to do? Just sit around and wait for him to decide just how disgusting I am?" "He doesn't think you're disgusting," Lucy assured her, taking a few steps forward. "Let's just calm down for a second, and—" No, I ruined it. I ruined everything. He'll never look at me the same way again. I never should have done this. I should have just. Gwen was at a loss for words. She felt like the world was closing in on her, and she began glancing around the dark woods like she was looking for a way out as the panic set in. But then she felt a warm hand gripping hers. Lucy had closed the distance between them. Gwen stopped rambling and looked into her eyes, trying to think clearly. "Lucy, what am I going to do?" she asked desperately, not waiting for an answer before she leaned forward and began to cry into Lucy's shoulder. Lucy put her arms around her. "Everything's gonna be fine. I'm gonna make this right. I promise." March, Year 4, Part 3. Ben could think of nothing else the next day. After his cousin had asked him out, there wasn't really going to be anything more unusual than that happening any time soon. Throughout the school day, he went through the same thoughts in every class, and yet he still couldn't wrap his head around it. My cousin asking me out. To Ben, it sounded crazy. He'd heard of stuff like that happening, but it was always about people in the distant past or from completely different parts of the world. That sort of thing just wasn't for people like him and Gwen. He spent most of his day trying to come up with what to say to her. He knew the answer should just be no, cousins can't date. They can't love each other that way. He figured she must just be confused somehow. She's never had a boyfriend before. Maybe she just doesn't know what that kind of love is like. That was the answer Ben kept coming to. In his mind, she couldn't really be in love with him, and he couldn't love her like that either. But the problem was, that answer felt wrong somehow. Even just saying "I'm not in love with her" in his head, it felt like a lie. But that made no sense, and it scared him to even consider the possibility of what that might mean. Of all the problems Ben had dealt with in the past, this was probably the one he most desperately did not want anyone else to find out about. He'd gladly tell his parents everything about the Omnitrix and all the aliens he'd risked his life fighting against before he ever told anyone about Gwen asking him out. That was why he avoided speaking to anyone as much as he could that day. He was pretty successful during class, since he would purposefully show up right when class started to not give anyone a chance to speak to him. However, he couldn't keep it up when lunchtime came. He was hoping Julie and her friends wouldn't be there. That way, they could have a conversation of their own and they'd be less likely to notice he wasn't talking much. Unfortunately for him, only Julie shared this lunch period with him, so it ended up being just the two of them. So anyway, that's kinda what it's like right now. What do you think? Julie asked. Ben hadn't heard a word of whatever she'd been explaining. He continued to eat his lunch, staring off into space silently. Julie waved her hand in front of his face. Earth to Ben. What? Sorry, what? Ben shook his head, focusing his attention on Julie. She looked at him curiously, showing slight concern. Hey, are you okay? You've been looking kinda down. What? No, I'm good, Ben lied. What were you saying about the thing? Julie leaned forward, putting her chin in her hand as she stared at Ben intently. Girl trouble. Ben was surprised. How did you know? Oh, I didn't. I had a few guesses lined up. That was just the first one I said. I was gonna guess family trouble next. It's the first one, just the first one. Julie glanced back and forth before looking at Ben very seriously. Is it about me? No, it's not. I promise. Are you sure? Because, I can understand how it might still feel weird to be hanging out with your ex-girlfriend like this. If there's something you still need to say to me. No, really, Ben said. It's about someone else. Julie nodded her acceptance. Who is it, then? Ally. Christina. Ben shook his head. He didn't say anything, hoping Julie would give up. Sorry, she said. I didn't mean to pry. It's all right if it's still too weird to talk about this sort of thing with me. It's not that, it's not someone you know, Ben said hesitantly. Part of him actually did want to talk about it, but he knew he had to choose his words very carefully. He couldn't risk admitting what was really going on. Okay, Julie said. So, what's the trouble? She asked me out. Gee, how terrible, Julie said sarcastically, smirking at him. Ben chuckled, but he didn't feel like it was funny. The problem is, I don't think I can date her. Why not? It's complicated. He tried, but he couldn't think of an explanation that didn't involve the whole truth or a complete lie. Julie leaned back and put her hand to her chin thoughtfully. Do you want to date her? She asked after a moment. I don't know. I guess I never really thought about it until she asked me. Well, sounds like she's just a friend to me. Julie shrugged. If you don't wanna date her, don't date her, she said as if it were as simple as that. But won't she be mad at me if I turn her down? Would you have been mad at me if I had turned you down? No, but it probably wouldn't have felt very good. It probably won't feel very good for her either, but it'll feel better than dating someone who doesn't want to date her. Ben stared down at his food, deep in thought. Julie was making some good points. If he didn't want to date her, he should just tell her so. Even if he ended up hurting her, she'd recover. They could continue being best friends afterwards, and then they could just forget the whole thing ever happened. But if that's all true, then why don't I want to say no to her still? But hey, if you're still unsure, you don't have to listen to me, Julie said. Think it over. Do whatever you think is best. Ben nodded. Thanks, Julie. After lunch, Ben spent the rest of the day still thinking about it. He'd hoped that talking it over with Julie would help, and it may have helped a little, but he was still very confused. When school was over, he checked his phone, but he had no messages. Usually, Gwen or Lucy would text him with their plans for the day, or he would text them, but he didn't feel like texting either of them at the moment. He didn't feel like stopping by the park on the way home to see if they were there either. I can't face her again until I have an answer for her. He definitely didn't have an answer for her yet, and she would probably kill him if he tried to act like everything was normal. Maybe tomorrow. Lucy hovered around Gwen's desk while they waited for the end of the school day, cheerily telling her everything that had happened in the classes she didn't share with her. Oh man. You should have seen the look on Nathan's face when Mr. Brentworth pulled his phone out of his hand. Gwen gave her a token chuckle, but it was clear her heart wasn't in it. Almost immediately, she went back to staring at nothing with a blank expression on her face. Looking to be somewhat on autopilot, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. After checking it, she sighed wearily. Seeing Gwen hang her head like that, Lucy's cheery expression temporarily faltered. It had been a few days since Gwen had attempted to ask Ben out, and she'd been in a daze like this ever since. Lucy had tried everything she could think of to cheer her up, but nothing worked. It was killing her to see Gwen depressed like this, and what made it even worse was that the whole thing felt like her fault. "You wanna sleep over at my place tonight?" Lucy asked. "It's Friday, so your parents won't mind. And Camille and Joel will let us order anything we want for dinner." "Sure, sounds great," Gwen said half-heartedly, nodding in agreement. Lucy bit her lip. This is bad. Soon after, their teacher dismissed the class, so they grabbed their things and headed outside. The walk to her house was awkward. Lucy tried her hardest to stay positive and she continued her attempts to cheer Gwen up, but no matter what she did, Gwen remained gloomy. What do I do? It wasn't until later in the day that Lucy finally decided to bring up Gwen's situation directly. They were on the couch watching a comedy show, with Lucy laughing along and making her own jokes whenever she could. Gwen mostly sat there facing the screen without really paying attention, only laughing along with Lucy occasionally and forcing a smile whenever she looked her way. After Gwen checked her phone for the 5th time since they'd sat down, that was when Lucy couldn't take it anymore. "Still nothing from Ben, huh?" she asked delicately. Gwen sighed and shook her head. Lucy grabbed the remote and paused the TV. "You wanna talk about it?" Gwen closed her eyes for a moment before responding. "There's not really anything left to talk about," she said. "He clearly doesn't want to date me. If he did, he would have told me by now. All I can do now is wait for him to reject me. That and hope he's not too weirded out to ever speak to me again." Gwen was practically emotionless as she spoke, and that worried Lucy. "Well, even if he does reject you, and even if he is weirded out by the whole thing, do you really think Ben could ever just stop talking to you for good?" "Yes, Lucy, I do." Gwen raised her voice and spoke with an absolute bitterness. Lucy couldn't tell if that was better or worse than when she was speaking emotionlessly. "Why do you say that?" Lucy asked, knowing she was probably stepping on a landmine. "Because he's done it so many times before," Gwen said angrily. "He hasn't said anything this week. He practically ignored me the whole time he was dating Julie. I barely saw him at all for months after our second summer. I was practically non-existent to him the year after our first summer. He spent most of our first summer telling me to get lost. And before that, we went nearly 2 years without seeing each other." Once she was finished exploding, Gwen brought a hand to her face, covering her eyes. This was it. This was the last straw. He's gonna go back to ignoring me and we'll never even be friends again. Lucy hurriedly slid over on the couch and wrapped her arms around her. No, no, Gwen, it's not gonna be like that, she assured her. Gwen took her hands off her face and sniffled. There were tears in her eyes, but she just looked angry. Damn it, I don't wanna cry anymore. Lucy leaned back, letting her hands rest on Gwen's shoulders. It's okay to, she said. Gwen exhaled heavily, shaking her head. No. I'm done with that. Okay. Lucy nodded. She kept her hands on Gwen until her breathing returned to normal and she looked like she was calming down, then she slid back a little. Look, I guess there's a lot I don't know about your history with Ben, Lucy admitted. But I know you guys now. Even if I was wrong about you guys loving each other that way, I know you still love each other. After all, if you've been separated over and over again like that, don't you think there's gotta be a reason you keep coming back to each other? Maybe, Gwen muttered. Let's just watch TV for now, okay? Gwen suggested, clearly trying to avoid talking about it anymore. Okay, Lucy said. It was clear that Gwen just wanted to get her mind off of everything, but as the show resumed, Lucy's mind was working fast. I'm gonna fix this. I promise. Ben still had no idea how to respond to Gwen a week after the incident. He hadn't seen her at all since then, as she had made no attempt to contact him either. She's probably still mad at me. He also hadn't seen Lucy at all in the past week. Making plans with her seemed risky because he knew she would want to invite Gwen along too, and he didn't want to have to explain to her why that wasn't a good idea. At first, he thought it was strange that she wasn't trying to invite him to hang out with her or anything, but after a few days, he figured Gwen must have told her something. Probably not everything, but enough to convince her to stay out of it. The night Gwen had asked him out, she'd brought up how many times they'd been separated in the past, and she'd told him it made her miserable whenever she couldn't see him. Ben knew exactly how she felt. This entire week had been boring and depressing. Even if he wasn't already worrying about how to handle this new situation with Gwen, it would have been terrible just because she wasn't around. After school one day, Ben went straight home. He'd been doing so all week since he wasn't meeting up with Gwen or Lucy and he was too preoccupied to hang out with Julie. When he got to his house, he trudged his way up the stairs and down the hall to his room. Grabbing the doorknob, he pushed the door open, and he was surprised by what he saw inside. Lucy was on top of his bed, eating from a bag of chips and sitting in a very unladylike fashion given the skirt she was wearing. After shoveling a handful of chips into her mouth, she noticed he was there. MHM. HMMHH. She said with her mouth full, smiling and extending an arm to wave enthusiastically. Lucy? Ben asked. What are you doing in my room? Eating chips. What's it look like? She asked, casually shifting her legs into a more comfortable position. Would you? Ben held out his hand and turned to look away. He sighed and walked over to his desk, taking his backpack off and setting it down. How did you get in here anyway? I've got your house keys, she said, pulling out a set of keys and playfully spinning them on her finger. The sound of the jangling keys made Ben turn his head. How did you get those? Dunno, Lucy said, shrugging. Then she hopped up to her feet and jumped off the bed. But I'm here, she said, striking a pose. Ben stared at her for a moment, still confused. Okay, I guess we'll pretend that doesn't need more explanation. So, what do you wanna do? Lucy casually leaned back, sitting herself down on the edge of the bed. Talk. Talk about what? About events of your recent past that have serious life-changing consequences, Lucy said, smiling cheerfully. Ben's eyes went wide. The offhand way she'd said that was surprising. Gwen told you? He said, sitting down on his desk chair. Lucy shook her head. She didn't have to. I saw the whole thing. What? You were there too? Yaha. I see everything. Ben sighed and lowered his face into his hands. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. You've been avoiding Gwen for a week now, Lucy pointed out. Ben quickly looked back up at her, glaring. So, what? You saying I'm a coward? Of course not, Lucy said, holding up her hands disarmingly. Look, I get it. Of course you'd be shocked by what Gwen did. But you can't avoid her forever. Ben felt a little ashamed and sulked back into his chair, not saying anything. I don't think I need to tell you this, but Gwen is absolutely miserable right now. She needs an answer. Even if it's not the one she wants. One way or another, she'll feel better once she knows, Lucy said. Ben stood up and started walking around his room with a slightly angry look on his face. This is so classic her. She puts all this crap on me, and then makes me the bad guy. She doesn't think you're the bad guy, Lucy said. She knew going into it that what she was doing was weird. She's not gonna hate you for reacting the way she figured most people would react. But this isn't how she wanted me to react, is it? Well, no. Then what did she want me to do? Say yes, Cinderella, I love you too. Let's get married and ride off into the sunset. That's probably not quite what she. I can't date her, Lucy. She's my fucking cousin. And not just through marriage or something like you, she's my actual goddamn cousin. I know that. I know. Just, calm down a little, Lucy said quietly, standing up and cautiously approaching Ben. Seeing the look on Lucy's face, Ben realized he was actually scaring her. He turned his back to her and pressed his hand to his face, exhaling deeply in annoyance at himself. Sorry, he said after taking a moment to calm down. It's okay, Lucy said softly, coming up behind him and gently placing her hands on his shoulders. You're upset right now. I get it. Gently tugging on him, she managed to guide Ben to sit down on the edge of his bed. Then she climbed up onto the bed and sat on her knees behind him, draping her arms over his shoulder as if to hug him from behind. What is she doing? Ben wasn't sure what Lucy was trying to do, but whatever it was strangely comforting. I don't know what to do, he said quietly. It'll come to you, Lucy assured him. I don't wanna hurt her. No, of course you don't, Lucy said gently, almost in a whisper. I couldn't imagine you doing anything to hurt her. Ben was glad she was here, but he couldn't help but wonder exactly how much she knew. She was there when Gwen tried to ask him out, so she must have been involved somehow. When did Gwen tell you? He asked, not needing to specify. Last month, Lucy said. But I figured it out a long time ago, even before she did. And you'd really be okay with us dating? Even though we're cousins? Yes. Absolutely. You can fall in love with anyone you want. Ben took another moment to think about things. Lucy was still hugging him from behind, and she brought a hand up to his head to gently stroke his hair. What do you want me to do? Ben asked, feeling like Lucy had the answer for some reason. I want you to do what will make you both happy, Lucy said. What if that's not possible? I'll make it possible. Ben was surprised by the conviction with which she said that. Do you love her? Lucy asked after Ben didn't speak for a moment. Of course I do, Ben said. She's family. She's my best friend. But I can't, like her, right? Lucy slid her arms off of Ben, scooted to the side, and moved up to sit beside him. I've always thought you two were in love, she said. When we first met at Camille and Joel's wedding, you and Gwen were just so close. And Gwen seemed so jealous that I got to be the one who danced with you. Lucy giggled a little before continuing. I heard the stories about you two, about how you did all those amazing feats of heroism together. And then, the summer I got to see it for myself, the way you guys threw yourselves into danger to save each other, and it's not just that. It's the way you act when you're together. You fight all the time, but you always stick together anyway. You both get so lonely when you're separated. You've been to hell and back together, and I know you'd be willing to do it all again. It seems like love to me. Ben said nothing, but he was staring at her, hanging on her every word and deeply considering everything she said. Was I wrong? Lucy asked. Ben sighed. Maybe. Maybe not. I do care about her as much as you say. There was silence for a moment. You don't have to decide on this right away, Lucy reminded him. No, Ben said. I've already decided. He stood up, taking a deep breath. I need to talk to Gwen. A few nights later, Gwen found herself back in those same woods. However, this time, she was the one standing in the clearing waiting for Ben to show up. Lucy had texted her not too long ago, telling her that Ben wanted to meet her tonight. The fact that he went through Lucy first meant that he was somewhat hesitant to talk to her, but he still needed to, and that made Gwen fear for the worst. He's going to reject me, isn't he? Gwen had known this would happen. She just couldn't stop herself from taking the risk, and now she had to face the consequences. He'll never look at me the same way ever again. The miserable expression on her face changed into one of extreme annoyance as soon as she saw Ben step into the clearing. He walked right up to her with an unreadable look on his face. Hey, he said, stopping a few feet across from her. Look, I already know what you're gonna say, so don't even bother, Gwen said, glaring at her cousin. I know what I said was disgusting, so can we just drop it already? No, Ben said. You're not disgusting. That's not what I'm here for. So, what, then? Are you here to tell me I was just confused, and that's not how I really feel about you? Yeah, I already know that. So, seriously, pretend I never said anything and let's just get on with our lives. Gwen spoke angrily and bitterly, but tried her best to maintain her composure. Dweeb, shut up for a second. Excuse me. Gwen said. Who the hell do you think you? I love you. What? Gwen thought she hadn't heard him right. Look, I talked to Lucy. She said some things about me, about us, and, look, I'm sorry for blowing you off and taking so long to give you an answer about this, but I realized that, maybe what you said, wasn't so crazy. Ben struggled with his words, but managed to squeeze out an answer. Gwen was stunned. Her anger had faded completely, and she was staring at him with a mixture of awe and relief. You really? I know things haven't always been great between us, and I know this probably isn't how you imagined all of this going down, and I don't even really know what this is, but I wanna give this a try. Gwen stepped forward, a tear dripping down her face and her lip trembling. you really mean it. Even though we're cousins. Ben chuckled. Don't make it weird. Gwen smiled, letting out a little light laughter of her own. She didn't think she'd ever been this relieved. Taking a few more steps to close the distance between them, she fell into him in a hug. Don't ever do that to me again, doofus. I know, Ben said, returning her hug. I thought you'd hate me. I thought I'd really lose you this time. You'll never lose me. Gwen didn't say anything else. She closed her eyes and stayed in Ben's arms, smiling blissfully. After a moment, her brow furrowed. You didn't bring Lucy with you, did you? I'm not here. Lucy's voice came from the woods. Ben. Hey, you brought her last time. Oh, for the love of go home, Lucy. Gwen shouted into the woods. In the distance, Lucy stood up into view. Oh, man. She whined before turning around and walking away. Gwen's face was red with embarrassment. Seeing the look on her face, Ben started to laugh. Quit laughing at me, doofus. We were having a moment. Gwen complained. But Ben didn't stop laughing, and before long, Gwen joined in too. They ended up lying on the ground together, holding hands and staring up at the night sky. The situation had been incredibly stressful for both of them, and now that they were past it, they were more than happy to take a moment for themselves and enjoy the contented silence. Gwen was still amazed by the whole thing. A little over a week ago, she'd barely even considered the possibility of Ben returning her feelings. And yet, here she was, holding hands with her cousin while they stargazed together. After lying there together for a bit, Gwen felt Ben shake her hand to get her attention. She turned her head to face him. So, what do we do now? Ben asked. Well, Gwen said as they both sat up. I guess we, date, right? I guess. He sounded like the idea was still weird to him, but he seemed somewhat excited by it too. Can I ask you out? Gwen asked. Ben knit his brow. Do you have to? I mean, isn't that kinda implied by now? And why ask if you can ask? Why not just ask? Shut up, doofus, Gwen said, standing up. I wanna do this. All right, fine, Ben said, also getting to his feet. They stood a few feet apart from each other. Gwen fiddled with her hands nervously, still embarrassed despite knowing what his answer will be. Ben, will you go out with me? Yeah, sure. Say it the right way. All right, geez. Ben cleared his throat. Yes, Gwen. I'd love to. Gwen smiled. Okay, she said, nodding. Thank you. I just really wanted to do that. Do you wanna go on a date tomorrow? Ben asked. Sure. Gwen agreed excitedly. What do you wanna do? Well, it's Saturday. We can spend the whole day together. We'll do all kinds of stuff. Okay. Gwen stepped forward and grabbed Ben's hand. Walk me home, she said. Ben chuckled. Geez. Ordering me around already. Better get used to it. The walk home was a surreal experience for Gwen. The whole time, she was holding hands with Ben, her cousin, whom she'd just started dating. And they were in public. It was the middle of the night and no one was around, but it was still strange. It made her heart beat like crazy, too. She knew it was nothing too exciting. People held hands all the time. But this was different. It meant something. When they arrived at her house, she let go of Ben's hand and walked up the steps, turning around to face him. It was a weird moment for her when she realized she didn't know how they were supposed to say goodbye to each other now. It felt like a few years ago when they'd officially become friends. Things had changed between them so suddenly, and now she was uncertain what that meant. "Thank you," Gwen said. She wanted to say more, like thanking him for falling in love with her too. But she realized they were still standing outside her front door in the middle of the night, so she left it at that. Ben smiled at her. "No problem, dweeb. See you tomorrow," he said, giving her a wave as he turned to walk home. "Bye." Gwen stood there watching him as he walked away, then she opened her front door and slipped inside as quietly as she could. But when she went upstairs and opened the door to her room, she was greeted by a high-pitched shriek. "What the?" Gwen was startled as Lucy jumped out at her. "Lucy! This is amazing!" Lucy shouted while hopping up and down excitedly. "You did it!" He said yes. He said yes. Okay, sure." Gwen pushed Lucy into her room and shut the door behind her, hoping her parents weren't around to hear anything. Lucy proceeded to jump around the room, cheering and throwing her hands up in celebration. "How did you even get house keys?" Lucy said, holding up a set of keys. Gwen just looked at her in confusion. Lucy stopped hopping and leaned in close to Gwen. "So, how was it? How do you feel? Anything happen after I left?" she said, excitedly firing off a barrage of questions. "Oh, right. Sorry about telling you to go away and everything, I was just..." "Hey, no worries. I get it. You wanted a little privacy is all. Totally cool. So, tell me what happened." Gwen told her everything that had happened after she'd left, including the parts about the date tomorrow and holding hands on the way home. Lucy squealed with delight. "That is so cute." Gwen was a little embarrassed telling her all of this, but Lucy's reaction made her smile, and she felt warm and fuzzy inside. "Okay, I'm gonna head home now and let you get some sleep. But tomorrow morning, I'm coming back, and we're gonna do some pre-date prep, okay?" Lucy said, skipping over to Gwen's door. "Wait," Gwen said quickly. Lucy froze in place, still as a statue in mid-step as she was reaching for the doorknob. She stayed like that for a few seconds before putting her foot down and turning back towards Gwen. "What's up?" she asked with a smile. Gwen fiddled nervously with a strand of her hair. I just really need to thank you. Everything that happened with me and Ben, you were right. And I never could have done it without you." "Pfft, I didn't do anything," Lucy said, waving her hand dismissively. Despite that, she was blushing a little. "That was all you, Gwen. You're a tough girl. You would have done it on your own eventually." "No, I mean it," Gwen insisted. "I owe you so much." "Thank you." Lucy walked over to Gwen and took her hands in hers. "You and Ben are my best friends. I'll always be there for you guys, no matter what happens. I promise." She leaned in and gave Gwen a kiss on the cheek. Before Gwen could say anything else, Lucy let go of her hands and stepped back. "Night, Gwen. See you tomorrow," she said, opening the door and skipping outside. "Good night, Lucy." And that's the ending of this part, everyone. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel, and also tell me your recommendation in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.